30th in Chicago. Thank you so much. Listen, some of the faces he showed didn't get verdicts because there were no charges. Let's go to Van Jones now. Van, the special prosecutor said that this is about what Derek Chauvin did, not who he is. But for so many in this country, the verdict here correlates to a concern over policing across the country. Your first thoughts and the context of what we're about to hear.
I've been in communication with a lot of young people on the ground in Minnesota. They feel like the humanity of a generation is on trial. People keep saying the system's on trial. It's not just a system. It's that they feel their humanity is on trial. Can this system ever truly respect black life? To have this videotaped lynching go around the world, people want to know. Does my life matter? It's not just a slogan. It's not just a political talking point. Does my life matter as a young person trying to make it in this country? And you have a lot of people who have been organizing. They are exhausted. I cannot tell you the level of just pure fatigue in that community, because it's not the first. No, remember, you had Philando Castile. You had so many other cases. This is the one that finally, we hope, will give some justice. But what you're hearing is fatigue, exhaustion, and people afraid to hope. They're excited because they think, hey, it came back early, maybe that's a good thing. But even with that, even with all the evidence, even with all the police testifying against the officer, even with the speedy verdict, even with Keith Ellison coming in and saving the day as the state attorney general, even with all that, people are literally afraid to hope. They're holding their breath and preparing for another body blow. This is going to, you have young people watching right now, 40 years from now, they'll remember today. 50 years from now, they will remember today. This is how important this is to a whole generation of young Americans.
And Van, what if it's not a guilty verdict?
I think it sends a very, very devastating. People are hanging on by the tendrils of a piece of dental floss right now, just barely holding on. The level of fatigue, the level of frustration, seeing the defense come out yesterday and spend 2 hours just saying what seemed to be just complete nonsense, never dealing with the fact that this man was on this man's back for 9 minutes. He's never apologized. He's never acknowledged anything, this officer. And so people are barely hanging on. So if it comes back negative, if it comes back, the message to a generation will be, you don't matter. Your life doesn't matter. Your pain doesn't matter. Your protests don't matter. Your voting didn't matter. Putting this man in office, Keith Ellison, a great state attorney general, even that didn't matter. So I can't tell you. I wish I could say something different. Now, I hope whatever the verdict is, people handle themselves responsibly. But I have to be very honest. People will feel that their humanity has been flushed down the toilet, and that anything can be done to us now. If a police officer can do this, what can't they do to us? What can't they do to our children? So that is what's at stake here. And every minute now is just agony. People waiting to see how this thing comes down.
You talked about this in the broader scope in the last 30 or 40 seconds we have now. I want you to narrow it and talk to me about your thoughts and feelings about Philonise Floyd, the Floyd family, as they are waiting for this verdict.
Well, listen, I mean, everybody is holding this family in prayer and in their hearts. They had to see this over and over again. Can you imagine this being shown? Somebody you love. This is not, it's not a name. It's not just George Floyd, a name. This is a human being who they knew, who they loved, and to see this, him being tortured to death over and over and over again. And look at the dignity. Look at the dignity. Let's stop taking black dignity for granted. Let's stop taking black strength for granted. Nobody should have to go through this, and this family is a treasure to this country.
Van, we really appreciate getting your perspective on all of this as we all wait and hold our breath for what's about to happen. Again, the breaking news: the verdict is in the Derek Chauvin trial, and CNN's special coverage continues with Jake Tapper, Don Lemon, and Anderson Cooper right now.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Welcome to The Lead. I am Jake Tapper, and we begin with the breaking news. The jury in the trial of Derek Chauvin has reached a verdict. After about 10 hours of deliberation, the jurors have come to a unanimous conclusion on the 3 charges against the former Minneapolis police officer for the death of George Floyd. The verdict will be announced this hour, according to the court. It is a moment that the nation and many throughout the world have been waiting for. Chauvin is facing second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter charges. The most serious charge is second-degree unintentional murder, and that carries a maximum sentence of 40 years in prison. Let's go straight to CNN's Sarah Seidner, live outside the courthouse in Minnesota. Sarah, you just spoke with George Floyd's brother. I can't imagine what they're feeling right now, but give us an idea. They're nervous, I imagine.
You know, it's really interesting, Jake, because the Floyd family, particularly Philonis and his brother Terrence, they're really calm dudes. Like, they really have a sense of calm. And I asked them how that is possible in a time like this when everyone else, including myself, is on tenterhooks. And they said, look, we just have faith and we believe that justice will be served. I called Philonis Floyd just as I heard that the verdict had been reached. He had not heard that the verdict had been reached. He says, you know, okay, what is it? And I said, I do not know what the verdict is. And I felt a bit bad being the one to tell him. But, you know, his response was, it's going to be all right. He says, look, I realize that this is a historic case in America. But for us, it is deeply personal, a deeply personal case. He lost a brother. Terrence lost a brother. Rodney lost a brother. People lost a cousin and an uncle and a friend. And so they're extremely calm, while everyone else around here is extremely nervous. You have this jury of 12 people. Half of the jury are people of color. There are 4 black men. There are 2 mixed race people on this jury, and there are 6 of the jurors. The other half of the jurors are Caucasian. They worked for a good 9 hours to deliberate. They went to deliberate at 4 o'clock yesterday, and they deliberated for 4 hours yesterday, and then came back and deliberated for about 5 hours before we heard that they had reached a verdict. What's really, I think, important in this case is that a hung jury would have been very difficult and devastating to a lot of people. And I think, you know, having a decision is very important for everyone that has been involved with this, because as you know, with a hung jury, it would mean that you would have to, if the prosecution decided, they would have to do this all over again with all 45 potential witnesses and the Floyd families and you know, and potentially a member of the Chauvin family going back over all of these things and having a brand new jury and going through all this all over again. That's not going to happen.
Well,
but
certainly you're not going to have a hung jury.
We don't know what is going to happen.
Right, and you're not going to have a hung jury after 10 hours. And the fact that this decision has been reached so quickly, we do not know what the verdict is, and we cannot assert what the verdict is in any way. We will hear it from the jury themselves in the courtroom. But generally speaking, Sarah, and you and I have gone through this a number of times, this would suggest an easy decision, whether it's an easy decision of not guilty or an easy decision of guilty.
You hit the nail on the head, Jake. They did not ask a single question because all of the media would have known. We were told that if they were to ask a question, they would have asked the question via Zoom to the court. And then the court, if they thought it was appropriate, would have given them a response. Not a single question. We have not learned of a single question that any of the jurors had asked in this case. And so this is going to be a decisive decision, if you will, from these jurors of 12 people. You know that we started with 14 because we had 2 alternate jurors. They were dismissed when this jury went to deliberate yesterday at 4 p.m. local time. And so we have a decision. We do not know. They can do one charge and they can decide on one, or they can decide all 3. He can be acquitted of all 3, or he can be found guilty of all 3, or just 1 or 2. So the system here is different than some other places in the country, and so this is one of those moments where we all just have to sit back and we have to wait for the foreperson, when asked what their decision is in court, we have to wait for that person to tell us what these 12 people have decided in the case involving a former Minneapolis police officer, Derek Chauvin, in the killing of George Floyd.
And let us just remind our viewers tuning in throughout the world, of the 12 people on the jury, we know that 6 of them are white, 4 of them are black or African American, and 2 of them are bi or multiracial, and that's according to the court. So whatever the conclusion is, it is one that all 12 of these individuals of a diverse jury reached very quickly.
Absolutely. It is a diverse jury. It's even more diverse than if you look at the state and at the county, but more reflective of Minneapolis itself. But you know the jury pool is a lot larger than just the city. So this is a diverse jury. It is both men and women. You have black folks, you have white folks, you have multiracial folks on this jury. They have been paying attention to, and we should make very clear that this jury was one that was writing notes the whole time, that was looking directly at the witnesses every single time and listening to the closing arguments and opening arguments. So they've been attentive, and now they have a decision.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Let's go now to CNN's Omar Jimenez. He's at George Floyd Square in Minneapolis. That's what they call this area of the city where George Floyd died. Omar, it must be an incredibly somber scene there.
It is, Jake. I mean, we've been talking to people here throughout the day about what this moment means. Of course, we were talking to them before we even knew a verdict was in. And for many of them, the common thread is that what happened to George Floyd is not an end-all, be-all, no matter what the verdict is, that this needs to be the beginning of a long-term practice of treating black people with respect. And this is really what it's all about. When you think about the verdict, and all, of course, we get caught up in all the legal proceedings and the trial and the legalese and what one witness said versus another, what it comes down to was this spot where George Floyd laid under the knee of Derek Chauvin for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, multiple minutes of which he was unconscious for back in May of 2020. It has become a makeshift memorial. It started at this Cup Foods here on the left, of course, with that call over a potential fraudulent $20 bill, where we know the cashier who initially wrestled with reporting it still feels guilt over that decision, thinking to himself, as we found out in court, that what if I hadn't called? What if I had just paid it out of my own pocket? Could I have stopped all of this? And then you're reminded of the stakes in this verdict. When you come over to the central part of George Floyd Square, you of course see the fist raised in the air, the statue that was erected here, but also you see the faces of George Floyd. As you come around the circle, you see the face of Tamir Rice. As you keep coming, you see the face of Breonna Taylor next to the sign of Black Lives Matter, and you see the face of Dante Wright, which of course just happened over the course of this past week. So those are the stakes that people feel are at play, that it's not just about George Floyd, it's about so many people that have died, in many cases, at the hands of police, Jake.
And I'm reminded of what I think what Will Smith said, that racism is not getting worse, it's just getting filmed. One can only imagine how this all would have played out had there not been a preponderance of smartphones in the vicinity. Omar Jimenez, we'll come back to you in a bit. We're told that Derek Chauvin, the defendant, is now in the courthouse. We don't have live pictures of that yet for you, but we'll bring them to you as we do, as the jury is preparing to announce their decision, their verdict. Let's bring in CNN anchor Don Lemon. Don, only about 10 hours of deliberations suggesting that for this jury of 6 white people, 4 African Americans, 2 multiracial people, that it was a relatively easy decision as these things go. What's your reaction?
Well, we don't know. I mean, one would tend to think with about 10 and a half hours, it was 4 hours yesterday, 6.5 hours today, that it was a decision that they reached unanimously and that it was a relatively easy decision. But Jake, as you know, listen, I'm old enough to have been in the newsroom for Rodney King and for O.J. Simpson and for George Zimmerman. And many times these things don't turn out the way you think they do, just because, O.J. Simpson was 4 hours that they deliberated, even though the trial went on for 11 months. So how am I feeling about this? Quite frankly, I think the way most Americans are feeling about it, angst. There's anxiety here. I'm anxious about it. There's a sense of dread as well, because I don't know what's going to happen after the verdict is rendered and after it is read. And you know, as I was getting ready to come here, and even earlier today, people were texting me and calling me saying, I'm really nervous about this. I'm really nervous about this, especially people of color, Jake, because of what this means for the entire country, but also what it means for the value of black life in this country and state violence against people of color. America is on trial here. And I think this verdict will indicate just how much of a value that the system, right, that America places on black people. Jake, I sat here, we've been sitting here for almost a year. It was the 25th of May, Memorial Day, last year, when we all saw that horrific videotape play out of George Floyd. If not that day, then soon after. And we were all sitting in our homes with nowhere to go because we couldn't, because we were in the middle of a deadly pandemic and a quarantine. And we were so open and so vulnerable, and we saw that. And I think, to a person, most people in this country were horrified by that. And many didn't know or understand how many people of color are treated by law enforcement in this country. And George Floyd laying there on that pavement with the life being snuffed out of him was evidence in real time of that treatment. And so here we are almost a year later, and there is a verdict, and it is, in many ways, a year has gone quickly, and it seems like it's gone at a snail's pace. But here we are, and America's on trial, and we're going to find out what the verdict is in just moments. We shall see what the value of a black life is.
This is happening very quickly. You note that O.J. Simpson was acquitted in 4 hours. George Zimmerman was also acquitted in 16 hours, also relatively quickly. We should note the big differences, obviously, in those cases, beyond the racial dynamics being very different in all of them. The murders of Trayvon Martin, the murders of all the other individuals that we have been talking about in the last year, generally speaking, with the only exception being that I can think of, Eric Garner, none of them were on tape. This was filmed, all 9.5 minutes of former Officer Chauvin's knee on George Floyd's neck. This was filmed. We all saw it.
Yeah, we all saw it. But if you've been watching, I've been glued to the coverage, and if you've been watching it, the defense has been trying to make us not believe what we have seen with our own eyes and what we heard at least 27 times of George Floyd saying, I can't breathe, if not more. So they're trying to convince us that, you know, that reality is not reality. And Jake, as you know, sadly, after the last 5 years, we live in a post-truth, post-reality world where people, depending on your beliefs or who you believe in or who you trust, that's what you're going to believe, regardless of what the evidence says. So there's a concern there, especially among people of color, especially among people who look like me. I must be honest, because when everyone says, well, of course, there's no way that Derek Chauvin is going to be acquitted. There's no way that he's not going to be guilty of the most major charge. And then people of color go, oh yeah, there's a way, because we've seen it before. Well, and we thought that the evidence was conclusive. But still, I know what you're saying, but still, even in the videotape, if you look at what the polling shows about what people thought about George Floyd and Derek Chauvin right after this happened, when it happened, many more people believe that George Floyd was killed by Derek Chauvin. And if you look at the polling now, they're not so sure about it.
Yeah, but the polling doesn't matter. What matters is what the opinions of the 12 individuals on the jury think.
And they are made up of people from the American public, just as people who are polled are made up of people from the American public.
I know,
many of the people who have been following this very closely.
I know, but my point is the polling doesn't matter. All that matters is these 12 people.
Right.
And the point I'm trying to make is, and I understand your skepticism, and I feel it and I hear it, and it's not new to me, this concept. But if you talked about the defense and what they did, and the defense did what defense attorneys do, they try to change the subject, or
it's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Throw as much on the wall and see what sticks. And we all talked over the last few weeks about this, that all he needed to do, that defense attorney, who, by the way, misled the jury and was reprimanded by the judge, or at least corrected by the judge for misleading the jury in terms of what was required in terms of cause of death.
Yeah.
But all that the defense attorney needed to do was convince one person because you need unanimity on the jury. My point is, there is no hung jury. It's unanimous within 10 hours. You know, so that strategy, if that in fact was the strategy, all I need to do is convince one person with this. And yeah, defense attorneys gaslight. That's what they do. That's their job. This trial is not new in that sense. Prosecution, in different cases, they gaslight too. But my point is, that didn't work. It was unanimity. And like, I think we all suspect what the verdict is going to be. We don't know, but we suspect what it's going to be because it's either an easy decision that Chauvin is not guilty or an easy decision that Chauvin is guilty, right?
Yeah.
That's where the math comes down, reading the tea leaves. And it's a diverse jury.
Yeah, as we look at those live pictures right now, 3:16 p.m. Central Time in Minneapolis. But here's the thing, Jake. Yes, and I think you're right. But what I'm speaking to is we don't know, and you're right. What it indicates in this short a period of time, it would tend to go one way or the other. But just look, this latter part of my career, the last couple of years, I don't want to be in the prediction business anymore.
Right.
And because I don't know. But what I'm saying is that jurors are made up of the American public. They are people as well. And they can be convinced otherwise. And, you know, so everything that we may be watching it and we may be absorbing it and we may be thinking, well, there's no way. I'm just saying that I've said, and many people have said before, there's no way. Now, I think you're right in your analysis, and you will probably be right. But I'm just saying, as my grandma would say, hold your horses, because you just don't know.
No, I hear you
right now.
And you're not the only skeptic I've talked to in the last hour. Believe me, on my way up here and talking to producers, and there are a lot of people who don't know, and feel like these are people who, generally speaking,
and people interpret that videotape very differently, Jake. There are people who, when they see the videotape, they say, you know, he was not complying, and they think that what he did before those 9 minutes and 29 seconds actually matters as well. If any legal person would tell you what matters is the 9 minutes and 29 seconds. That's what matters. But again, we shall see.
We shall see, indeed, Don Lemon. I want to bring in Anderson Cooper and his panel, and I'm told, Anderson, that George Floyd's brother, Philonis Floyd, is going to be in the courtroom for the reading of the verdict. Anderson?
Jake, Don, thanks very much. We'll come back to you very quickly. I want to talk to our team here, legal and otherwise, here in New York. Laura Coates, just your quick thoughts right now as we await this verdict.
Thank goodness there's not a hung jury right now, because the idea of there being a hung jury, they had these questions. We didn't have a single jury question. They didn't have confusion about any of the charges. There was unanimity, obviously. What it actually holds, we're all on bated breath.
Lee, what does that mean?
Well, look, I was taught that the moment a jury verdict comes down is the most serious and solemn moment in our democracy. I was taught that as a prosecutor. And when a verdict comes down, I was taught as a prosecutor, you don't move. You don't celebrate. You don't sulk. And you have to be mindful of who's there. We just heard Philonis Floyd will be there. The family members of the deceased are there. The defendant has his rights. He is there. So this is sort of the height of our criminal justice process. And I was taught to have very deep respect for that moment.
Van Jones?
Outside of that courtroom, the biggest mass movement for human rights in the history of our species is waiting. This is the biggest. Millions and millions of people, not just in the United States, around the world, marched. People tried to move heaven and earth to get justice here. We'll see if it worked. Chief Ramsey?
Well, I guess like everyone else, I'm, on the edge of my seat waiting for a verdict. But regardless of where this comes out, guilty, acquittal, this is a moment we can't waste. There has to be reform. And we can't take a deep breath and say, oh, it's over. This is just one case. That's all it is when it comes down to it. It's tragic, but it's one case. There's a lot that still needs to be done. And I hope we don't lose sight of that.
You just think, Van, you think back in history of all the people who have been killed, of all the people who have been fired from jobs, of all the injustices perpetrated against minority communities in this country where there were no cameras and where there was no national audience watching and waiting, and how history turns and the story, the injustices can remain the same. We'll see what the outcome is this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And Emmett Till's family is watching alongside George Floyd's. In other words, you have 60 plus years of this type of brutality. Emmett Till didn't get justice. Rodney King didn't get justice. We can give the whole list of people who didn't get justice. Today, if this can happen in America and the whole world see it and there is no justice, it is a very, very devastating comment on how far we still have to go in this country.
Let's talk about, oh, sorry, Laura.
I was going to say, I'm glad you brought up what happened to Emmett Till, because I think it's such a precursor in the sense that that mother wanted the world to see what they did to her boy. They wanted the world to see, because there weren't the cameras, there wasn't the video of that horror, that torture, that atrocity. And now you've got, all this time later, a man who called out for his mother, and the world was able to see what happened to her boy. And now
And for those who don't know the story of Emmett Till, his mother wanted them to see, literally see his body in the casket.
She wanted everyone to see, with an open casket, the way in which they had diabolically tortured a 14-year-old child, and the way in which that particular time in American history treated a young black child. And the atrocity of it, the anvil in his case was more than figurative. It was the idea of now the anvil and the weight of American history on Black America. But the idea here that the world has seen, remember how the prosecution ended the case. You can believe your eyes. You can believe your eyes. This will tell us if America's eyes are open and if they actually do believe what happened to that mother's child.
The defense, in their closing, responded essentially with, don't be misled by freeze-frame stills on video. Let's talk about the actual charges that the jury had to decide on. Second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter. Can you explain?
You know, this is the three different charges. For many people look at this, and I know, Ellie, you have a lot of comments on this as well. The hardest part to reconcile in Minnesota law is that these are unintentional acts, not intent to kill, but you still have to intend to perform the act that caused the death. So this is essentially the third-degree murder is you intended to commit the underlying felony, that being the knee to the neck. That's the felony assault. Then you go down to the idea of second-degree murder. That's the one talking about that you acted with a depraved heart in total disregard for the sanctity of human life by an action that you intended to commit, even if not intending to kill him. Then you have the idea of manslaughter, culpable negligence, meaning more than just ordinary negligence, that you had a slip of mind. No, it's that you intended the behavior and you were reckless, essentially, in your behavior, and it was grossly negligent. But the intent component is difficult to reconcile for a lot of people.
So, Ellie, I mean, jurors have had to decide essentially a number of things, but what was in Derek Chauvin's mind? What was the policies of the Minnesota Police Department? And what was the likely cause of death?
Yeah, Anderson, first of all, it's important that people understand each one of these charges stands alone. The jury's not going to just pick one and say, we find on that one. We are going to hear count one, guilty or not guilty. Count two, guilty or not guilty.
And they can find guilty on all?
They can find guilty on all. They can find guilty on any two, any one, or none. They have those options. Now, as to what was in Derek Chauvin's mind, there are two issues that overlay all three of the counts that Laura just outlined. One, was Derek Chauvin's use of force excessive? Did it violate police training, police procedure, police protocol? I think, in my opinion, the evidence was very powerful on that. We heard from Chief Arredondo, we heard from the senior lieutenant on the police force, we heard from the training officer, and the defense side, all we heard from was this one expert, Barry Broad, who tells us it's perfectly fine if someone's prone to use whatever you want to restrain them.
And Chief Ramsey, just from a law enforcement standpoint, you agree with that?
I do agree. I agree that it was wrong. I agree it's outside of policy. I've talked to a lot of police chiefs. There's not a single one, as well as police officers, that believe what he did was okay. And I don't know Mr. Broad at all, but you can always find somebody that's going to, present that sort of opinion. But believe me, this is so far out. It's
just one thing I think is important to remember is the reason that we're here and the reason that all this stuff matters is because you did have a mass movement. And don't forget, the local prosecutors were bumbling the ball. And you had people putting pressure. And that pressure resulted in Keith Ellison, the state attorney general, being able to take the case. And then they put on, I thought, an extraordinary case. I've seen a bunch of these cases where you felt the prosecutors were deliberately botching it. They didn't put the time in. They didn't really care. In this case, you saw the prosecutors do an extraordinary job.
I completely agree with Van. The initial complaint that was filed by the local prosecutors in this case was a mess.
Yes.
There were facts in there that were irrelevant. They talked about the size of George Floyd, and I think we all understand where they were going with that. They left out important facts. Flags were raised. The Attorney General did the right thing. He stepped in, he took over the case, and I think gave it really a grade A prosecution.
You know, immediately what comes to mind in this case is the reinstatement of one of these charges, that third-degree murder charge that was reinstated over the course of this trial. And that harkens back to what happened to another former Minneapolis police officer, Mohammed Noor, who killed Justine Damon, who is an Australian woman living in Minneapolis who reported a sexual assault in the alley and was shot by this officer. Now, he was convicted, if you recall, on that particular charge. And so there was a whole lot of appellate process going on about whether that particular charge should apply to a police officer or anybody, frankly, who had one particular victim in mind per se. And so I suspect that over the course of this particular verdict, if third-degree murder is in fact one of the convictions, if any, then it is not going to end there. There'll still be an appellate battle because the Supreme Court of Minnesota did not finally weigh in on that issue.
It is complex what they have to decide. And I mean, I had to read it several times, and I just want to quickly, for our viewers, second-degree unintentional murder charge alleges Chauvin caused Floyd's death without intent while committing or attempting to commit felony third-degree assault. In turn, third-degree assault is defined as the intentional infliction of substantial bodily harm, correct?
Yes.
This is from a CNN, right? The third-degree murder charge alleges Chauvin caused Floyd's death by, quote, perpetrating an act eminently dangerous to others and evincing a depraved mind without regard for human life. And the second-degree manslaughter charge alleges Chauvin caused Floyd's death by, quote, culpable negligence, whereby the person creates an unreasonable risk and consciously takes chances of causing death or great bodily harm.
For every word you just used, that's an element the jury has to find the prosecution proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Depraved mind, consciously, the idea of substantial causal factor of death, all the things, the way that you went through the list of figuring out, it wasn't just, we talked about this, Ellie, it wasn't just 3 charges the jury had to go back and deliberate on. It was each of those charges had 3 to 4 elements inside of it. So you're talking about 12 things they had to decide. And all of this done within 11 hours?
Yeah. And let me try to really just boil it down. Count 1, the top count, assault. Okay? You don't have to prove as a prosecutor that there was an intent to kill. You have to prove that it was an intentional assault. Count 2, reckless. Reckless. Meaning the actions of Derek Chauvin, again, you don't have to prove Derek Chauvin said, I'm going to kill this person, but that he created a reckless danger to George Floyd.
And that charge is the, which one?
Third-degree murder, yes, the second most serious charge. And then the least serious charge, the third charge, the manslaughter, is negligent. Meaning, again, Derek Chauvin didn't necessarily want to kill or intend to kill George Floyd, but he created an unreasonable risk.
And in terms of possible jail time, there's both prescribed jail time for each count. I think 2 of the counts have the same prescribed jail time, but prosecutors have also said there's aggravating circumstances which would allow more jail time, correct?
That's correct. And so you have the opportunity for a jury to decide about those aggravating factors. The prosecution puts forth that it was because he was in a vulnerable position, particularly the power dynamic of an officer performing this act against a civilian in the presence of a child. All of these things can be aggravating factors. And the defendant can opt to have the jury decide these issues. Chauvin did not decide to have that. He decided to have the judge essentially assess that. So if there is a conviction, the judge will then weigh the allegations of aggravating factors and decide whether the sentence should reflect that. There's always a guideline, a grid that says, here is a possible sentencing range according to your criminal history. He's a former cop.
Very quickly, Ellen.
Yeah, sentencing will not happen today. No. There's 2 numbers to watch. The max sentences for each of these counts. 40 for the top, 40 years, 25 for the middle, and then 10 for the bottom charge. But within those range, under those ranges, is the guidelines, the sentencing guidelines recommended ranges that Laura's talking about.
Check back on it. Jake?
Anderson, thanks so much. If you're just joining us, the jury in the Derek Chauvin trial in Minnesota has reached a verdict. That verdict will be read at some point in the next 30 minutes, according to the court. The jury reached its verdict shortly after 3 p.m. Eastern time, we're told, after around 10 hours of deliberations, which experts and observers say is not really all that many hours of deliberation. Chauvin is facing second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter charges. Let's go now to CNN's Miguel Marquez. He is in Minneapolis, a city that's been on edge now and waiting for this verdict any minute now. I can't imagine what it's like. Miguel?
Yeah, it feels like there is a lot of energy coursing through this city right now, and we're in front of the courthouse right now. I want to show you just sort of what the scene is right here. Right in front of us, this is Courtney Ross, who is speaking, and some of her friends Courtney Ross is the girlfriend of George Floyd, who testified in this case. I just asked her a few minutes ago what she expects, given that this has come back so quickly, and she says they expect that it is guilty on all 3 counts. They also say that if there's a mixed verdict or it's innocent on all 3 counts, the only thing they would say is, I pray for Minnesota. I want to show you just in the last few minutes, this has all developed here, where you can see a lot of press, but also lots and lots of people who have come from all over Minneapolis. It is not a sense of celebration, but it is a sense of relief down here. I'm going to talk to Jesse real quick. Jesse, we were speaking to you earlier. We are live on CNN. You heard about the verdict come in. Where did you come from?
I came from work, actually.
Were you downtown? Where's
Yes,
work?
sir. I just got off work and I came downtown and I ran into you and a couple people, and they said that the verdict was in.
And what is your expectation that it's come back in 10 hours?
My expectation is guilty.
On all 3 counts?
On all 3 accounts. That's what I'm hoping for.
And if it is, what message does that send to the black community here, across the country, around the world?
I think it sends a positive message. I think it's a step towards the right way, as far more as us finally seeing justice for such a horrific incident, and I just really believe it's going to come back guilty.
And how concerned are you that it could be a split decision or not guilty on all 3 counts?
I'm not concerned about a split guilty at all a split decision, and this is the reason why, because so much of society right now is hanging on to it being guilty, and if it's not, it's going to be chaos.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll be
and
watching along with you.
I'm trying to read this poem called George Floyd is My Emmett Till, as I told you.
George Floyd and Emmett Till, that connection. He has a poem that he wants to read here tonight. I also want to bring over, do we have her? Come over here, guys. I want to bring over, this is Courtney Ross. Courtney? Hold on, I'm going to put the mic up while she's speaking. This is George Floyd's girlfriend.
My soulmate. He is someone I will be with during life and after death. I love him. He is a man with a big heart, like everyone is saying in the courtroom. Okay, baby.
Ms. Ross?
And sorry, it's hard when someone. I'm not used to it.
Ms. Ross.
That's important. I would just let you know.
Courtney?
Floyd was nothing but fun.
Yeah, she's grieving right now.
He was funny and silly and prayerful and a man of God. And he was out of this world. And I like to tell people a lot, like, Floyd was a big man, and he was too big for this earth. And I see it now. I see that he's over all of us right now. And
we got your back. We got your back.
Ms. Ross, will a guilty verdict on all 3 counts bring any solace to you?
I can't say. I just can't say.
What would George think about all of this? What he created?
I've always called him Floyd. So George is always kind of like, who is that? Like, where George? I don't know who that man is. I didn't date him. No, I'm just kidding. What I know Floyd would want out of all of this is that people would be coming together. All people would be coming together. This isn't a time to separate. This isn't a time for us to blame or hurt each other. It's a time for us to come together. I know this verdict is coming back guilty. And when it does, I hope that his heart will really come through in everybody and know that he is such a loving man and would want us all to just, like Tashira said earlier, put our arms around each other and just love us. love each other today.
And what will guilty verdicts mean to Minneapolis? What will it mean to Minnesota?
I think it'll mean change. It'll mean change. It's a first step in a long road to recovery. We have a lot of work to do in Minneapolis, but I believe Floyd came here for a reason. This is a sacred, sacred land, and we need to start respecting that again. And I know that that is what he would want. Floyd was attached to this city. He was attached to the lakes, particularly Lake Budemakaska, and I know that it happened here for a reason. Maybe we are the epicenter for change. Maybe we're making the world look at things in a different way. I'm not sure, but I know it definitely started that momentum.
And why so important to be standing in this physical space right now?
I think so many of us have a lot of negative experiences with the government. This is not a comfortable place for many of us to be or to look at, though it represents our city. And I love Hennepin County, and I always stand for 612 Minneapolis. That's right. That's my city. But at the same time, I've had many bad encounters here. And so I think it's time that we show what this building is supposed to be about, and it's supposed to be about justice. So it needs to come back with that guilty verdict so we can start to believe again in what this is about.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very good luck to you. Jake, just a little sense of, I want to show you one other thing that's happening down here all the way on this side. They've actually set up a barbecue, and there is that sense, not quite of celebration, but certainly of relief. A great expectation that this is going to be guilty on all counts. If it's not, that may be even a bigger problem. Jake?
Yeah, you just heard there from Courtney Batya Ross, the girlfriend of the late George Floyd, expressing confidence that it will be a guilty verdict and that hopefully this will bring about some unity in the United States. Miguel Marquez, thank you so much. I want to go now straight to CNN's Sarah Seidner. She's live outside the government building, the courthouse in Minnesota. And Sarah, you've been talking to the Floyd family. What are they telling you?
So I just heard from Philonis Floyd, George Floyd's brother, and reminding folks that he was also the person that the day after he laid his brother to rest, he went to Congress and spoke in front of them for the George Floyd Policing Act. And so he is hoping for reform. But right now, he is up in the court room. He told me that he was pacing, getting ready to go into the court to hear this verdict. He is now in the court, and he said to me, you know, after all of this, for him, he has had a really hard time sleeping. And he said, I haven't been able to sleep throughout much of this. And he said, maybe hearing this verdict will finally help me get some sleep. And in his mind, he wants the verdict to be a certain way. And he said if it goes that way, then he might finally be able to get some real rest, because he hasn't since the day that his brother, George Floyd, was murdered on May 25th, 2020. He also said that this, he realizes, is historic for the world, for America, and that he was heartened to see that so many people cared about what happened to his brother. And he commented about so many people across America from different creeds and colors who came out in his name, and to see all the people. And he kept mentioning, I see all the people. I appreciate their support, whether it be in the streets or in the halls of Congress. I see all of the people who have stood up for justice and stood up for his brother and against what happened to his brother. So right now he is inside of the court waiting on the verdict, just like all of us. Jake?
There was never a question. They wanted the police, I should say, to be treated how any other person would be treated if they had done the actions that Derek Chauvin had done. And so that's what people are feeling here. And when you think about this moment that we're in, this moment that has been coming for almost a year now, that has been building up, this is why it's important. This reminds you of the somberness and the reality of the situation, that a human life was lost at the hands of police, that a family still has a gaping hole. The only question is with this verdict, does this now become a spark point for even further to come out of here in Minneapolis, Jake?
All right, Omar Jimenez, and it's all in the hands of the jury right now. We're expecting them to come and to the courtroom, to the government center, and announce their unanimous decision after only 10 hours. We're all riveted, waiting to hear what they have to say. We understand that President Biden at the White House is at his TV, watching, waiting to find out what the verdict will be. Let's bring in Anderson Cooper and his panel. Anderson?
Jake, thank you very much. Appreciate it. When the jury does come, and we're not sure if they've been, do you believe that they've been sequestered at the hotel and that's where they came up with the verdict?
We believe so. That's where they have been sequestered for the evenings at a hotel. They could come or talk to their families and communicate, but they were deliberating very late last night. And the assumption is that they are being transported to the courthouse during some part of this. Remember, you were able to hand over notes through Zoom because they didn't want to have to bring the defendant, the counsel, everyone in. The jury never goes in the room to actually hand over the question to the judge. It's always sort of done in this distance way to give them their
So what's going to
sentencing.
happen once they are brought back, whether they're there now or not, when they actually are back in the courtroom, what happens?
They're going to sit in the jury box the way they have been through the entire trial. The foreman will hand the jury verdict to the judge, who will then review it quickly, ask if they've all been able to lead to a unanimous verdict, which has to happen, in Minnesota. It must be unanimous.
At this stage, does the judge already know what the verdict is?
Yeah, usually the judge gets a look in advance. He knows what's coming. He will ask the foreperson of the jury, count one, how do you find? Guilty or not guilty? The foreperson will read the verdict. We'll do that times 3. And then the next big thing that happens, if there is a conviction, the prosecution often seeks to remand the defendant, to send him into jail. Derek Chauvin has been out on bail pending trial. What changes if there's a conviction is that presumption of innocence is now gone. So it's common, it's up to the prosecutor if you want to ask this, and the judge doesn't always agree. But I've had cases like this where someone's out on bail, get convicted, you say, Judge, we now move to remand the defendant, and often, not always, often the judge says, I grant that motion, and he's off to prison.
So there's an option. He might be able to go home, or he might actually directly go to prison.
Well, sometimes it's called step back oftentimes, right? And they could be able to do it because this is a murder conviction. It's not one that's a non-violent crime. Sometimes judges will give the luxury of being able to settle one's affairs before being brought in. But of course, Derek Chauvin, if he is convicted of murder charges, one or more, or of any of them, then there is a presumption that he is no longer able to have the benefit of freedom. But again, this is not a sentencing opportunity yet. This will be the conviction or acquittal moment. The judge will still have to determine, often through a report, there'll be discussions about remorse, et cetera. He'll fill out some paperwork. He'll talk to the equivalent of a probation officer about his views on the crime and what he has done to sort of guide the opportunity in the judge's hand to say, what am I dealing with? What type of criminal or felon am I dealing with now? Am I talking about somebody who's likely to be a recidivist, meaning they'll return to a life of crime, somebody who needs treatment in other ways? All this holistic sentencing will take place before the actual time the judge says, here is the number of anything. We in America have changed this over the course of time to say it's not just a pipeline to prison post-conviction, it's about how we can rehabilitate offenders as well.
Van Jones, obviously people are listening very closely to, is it going to be conviction on all counts? Will it be? How much does that matter in terms of the public's response?
I think it matters a lot. I think, obviously, if there's an acquittal, it's completely devastating. But if it's just the lower one, he's negligent, that didn't feel negligent. That didn't look like negligence. And so I do think that it matters. If it's all 3, I think you're going to feel a level of vindication for this movement and for this community. And don't forget, this is not the only case in that area. I've talked to people on the ground there. What you have to understand about this, where this is happening, it's the most livable place, and it also has the biggest disparities. In other words, it's a great place to be white, and it's a terrible place to be black. That's what everybody tells me. And they say the level of friction between the Hmong community there, the Somali community there, the black community there, and the police is unreal. They say they feel like they're in a war zone all the time. Then you bring in all these troops. You have a grieving community that's already traumatized, and now you have police and troops everywhere. So they are literally just on pins and needles. If you have a complete vindication of what all these grassroots groups have been saying, then there's relief. But if you come back with just one charge, and then if the sentencing guidelines give you, a couple of years, it's going to be putting salt in a very big wound.
Chief Ramsey, we have several hours now or time where we are awaiting this verdict. Law enforcement also has time to try to figure out, obviously they have been going over contingency plans for quite some time.
Well, they have been going over plans. I mean, you have to be prepared whether there's an acquittal or whether there's a conviction, because you're going to have in many cities people take to the streets, either in celebration or because they're upset because of the verdict. You have to be ready no matter what. Unfortunately, they have some experience because in May, with the killing of George Floyd, there was a lot of unrest. And so many of the areas where you had unrest, you're going to already have your platoons out there to be able to protect strip malls and different places like that where you're likely to have some issues. And you want to be able to have people just celebrate and express their First Amendment rights at the same time. So you got to have that balance there. And I think right now that's what's been taking place. There's been a lot of preparation. There's been a lot of conference calls between major city chiefs, conference of mayors, IACP and PERF, talking about the things that went bad in May, so we don't repeat the same mistakes in May, and that's important.
But you also do have on the other side of it, you've got to try to have some public order and some safety. But you also had 50 grassroots organizations begging, saying you have now too much police presence on us. You got these Humvees, you have all this stuff, and the young people feel that they are being pushed up against the wall. They need the space to grieve. They need the space to celebrate, and they need the space to be able to do it the right way. And so sometimes, you're in a tough situation if you're in local government there, because if you don't have enough presence, you're going to get in trouble, but you can also overdo it. And so what my hope is that you have, let me just give some praise to some of these groups, Black Visions Collective, Reclaim the Block, Minnesota Youth Collective, Take Action Minnesota, ACER, Movement Voter Project. Those young people have been out there when the cameras were there and when they weren't, keeping this movement going. They need space to protest tonight safely or to celebrate tonight safely. I hope they get it.
What's concerning, though, is we have a Pavlovian response in America that when we have impending verdicts and you see buildings start to be boarded up and businesses start to close, that trust gap that's already there between our justice system and members of the community, it expands exponentially. Because in their minds, they say, you're preparing me for an acquittal. You are telling me if it's boarded up, you anticipate my unrest, my wrath. You anticipate the devolution of a protest into looting and other things. And so part of what you're seeing in terms of the unease you're speaking about, Van, is that Pavlovian reflex and response to say, what does this mean if you are calling out the National Guard? People believe, did you get a heads up, Governor? Did you get a heads up, Mr. President? Did you give a heads up, Judge? Do you know something that we do not know? And finally, on the point that you raised, Van, about the difference between how people will compare and what negligence looks like, Minnesota has a very specific and recent memory of what second-degree charges look like, second-degree manslaughter, because Geronimo Jimenez, who killed Philando Castile, charged and acquitted with the second-degree manslaughter charge. Does that feel the same way for George Floyd to people? You have the officer, now resigned, Kim Potter, who killed Dante Wright. Same charge. Does that feel the same way of that 9 minutes and 29 seconds? And so you've got a population of people, human beings, who are saying, well, if I'm going to compare, this doesn't feel like those cases. And if that's all he gets, this is going to be something that might contribute to that trust gap widening.
Let's go
Anderson,
back to...
real quick, if I can just respond to something Van said. One of the things that was discussed is not having a heavy-handed approach immediately. If you need to have people in riot gear and so forth, have them out of sight. Stage them someplace out of sight. They can respond quickly, but you start off as low a level as you can.
Let's go back to Jake.
Thank you, Anderson. We are standing by for the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial to be announced any minute. I'm going to hand it over to CNN's Wolf Blitzer right now. Wolf?
Jake, thanks very much. I'm Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. We're picking up our special coverage of the Chauvin trial. Verdict expected momentarily. Joining us, Anderson Cooper and Don Lemon. But I want to go to Sarah Seidner first. She's on the scene for us in Minneapolis. She's right at the courthouse where we expect this verdict fairly soon. Right, Sarah? Looks like we have to reconnect with Sarah Seidner. We're going to try to reconnect with her momentarily. We're also watching all of this unfold with Don Lemon and Anderson Cooper. Let me bring in Don Lemon right now. Don, you got some thoughts on what we can anticipate?
I do have some thoughts, Wolf, and just so you know, I've been in communication with Ben Crump, the family attorney, and I asked him, I said, what can I say right now? Are you optimistic? Are you cautious? Who is with you? What's the mood? Where are you? And he said, Philonis and I are in the courthouse. He said, the family has faith that Derek Chauvin will be found criminally liable for killing George Floyd. And again, that's from Ben Crump, the family attorney. And as has been reported earlier, that Philonis Floyd, the brother of George Floyd, is going to be in the courtroom when the verdict is read, and he is there now with the family attorney and the family. I would imagine it together, and they are cautiously optimistic that considering the time that it took the jury to deliberate, Wolf, and come up with a verdict that is going to be at least in their favor. Not exactly sure how they're going to rule on all the charges, but there you go. That is the latest from the family and the attorney, Wolf Blitzer.
Yeah, we're going to be checking back with them all the time. Sarah Seidner, we just managed to reconnect with you, Sarah. First of all, tell us where you are and tell us what you're seeing.
All right, so we are right across the street from the Hennepin County Government Center where the court is. We know that George Floyd's brother, Philonis Floyd, is inside of the court. We know that we have our reporter inside of the court as well, Josh Campbell. He is there to listen to the jury read the verdict. We are awaiting. We know that Derek Chauvin is inside the court as well. Chauvin went in about 8 minutes past 3 local time, so 4:08 your time. And so everyone is waiting for the jury to come in, and everyone is waiting to hear from the foreperson as to what their decision is. I'll give you an idea of where we're standing. If you look to my right, there is the train and the edge of where everything is blocked off around the courthouse. If you look at the little gate that's there, that's where a lot of folks have been brought into the court, in and out of the court in cars. And then if you look to my left, you will see a little grassy knoll there, and just beyond that there are dozens of people that have gathered, some of whom knew George Floyd well, and who are here to speak their piece. And we do know that the family will be speaking within an hour after the verdict is read. We also know that we heard from Philonis Floyd just before he went into court. He said he was pacing, that he has been patient, but he was pacing right before he went in. He said, "Look, I am hoping that this verdict helps me finally get some sleep, because since May 25th, 2020, he hasn't really been able to sleep well at night. It has been extremely difficult for this family. It has been extremely difficult for this community. Whether you are a resident here, a business owner here, an official here, there have been a lot of very emotional folks around, and those emotions are at their height at this moment. There are folks that are already in tears. There are folks that are worried about what this jury is going to do. And so you also have another case not too far from here, a few miles from here, where another black man, unarmed, was shot and killed by police in Brooklyn Center. And so the combination of all that makes for a very, very tense scene. And it is why, and I'll give you a look, the media is, of course, here from around the world. This building is the Star Tribune building, which is one of the newspapers here, the newspaper here. And you can see it's boarded up as well as almost every single other building downtown here and around other parts of the city as well, including near George Floyd Square, where dozens of people have already gathered there too. Wolf?
We're going to stay in very close touch with you, Sarah. I want to bring in Omar Jimenez. He's also on the scene for us. Omar, tell us where you are and what you're seeing.
Right now, Wolf, we are at George Floyd Square. This is ground zero for where George Floyd's final moments.
All right, hold on, Omar. This is the judge, the Hennepin County Judge Peter Cahill.
All rise for the jury. All right, please be seated. Now I'm going to ask you individually if these are your true and correct verdicts. Please respond yes or no. Juror number 2, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 9, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 19, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 27, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 44, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 52, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 55, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 79, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 85, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 89, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 91, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 92, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Are these your verdicts, so say you one, so say you all?
Yes.
Members of the jury, I find that the verdicts as read reflect the will of the jury and will be filed accordingly. I have to thank you on behalf of the people of the state of Minnesota for not only jury service, but heavy-duty jury service. What I'm going to ask you to do now is to follow the deputy back into your usual room, and I will join you in a few minutes to answer questions and to advise you further. So, all rise for the jury. All right, be seated.
10 minutes, guilty on all 3 counts. Guilty second-degree murder, guilty third-degree murder, guilty second-degree manslaughter. You saw the former police officer there, Derek Chauvin, handcuffed. He's going back into jail. He was out of jail on bail, awaiting these verdicts. Guilty on all 3 counts. Let's get immediate reaction from Don Lemon. Don, you're watching this as closely as anyone.
Justice has been served. And you can see the reaction from the crowd, how America feels. And I'm sure people who are watching all over this country or watching all over the world are on their devices getting messages from people, as I am, saying, thank you, Jesus. Thank God. Finally, justice on all counts. The attorney for the Crump family has reached out and given me a statement, Wolf, and he says, guilty. Painfully earned justice has finally arrived for George Floyd's family. This verdict is a turning point in history and sends a clear message on the need for accountability of law enforcement. Justice for Black America is justice for all America. We thank Minnesota AG Keith Ellison and his team, along with our legal team, for fierce dedication to justice for George. But it does not end here. We still have work to do. We have to make the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act become law so we can hold law enforcement accountable and prevent so many of these unjustified killings of marginalized people of color. This reminds me in so many ways, and it's not specific, but it reminds me of the tension and the passion and the angst that was felt during the reading of O.J. Simpson. People on the street hugging each other people were just beside themselves. But remanded into custody, the verdict spoke for itself, and if that didn't speak for itself, Wolf, a police officer who had been on the job for years, a training officer, handcuffed and led away, and the next place for him, the next home for him, will be prison.
You know, Don, this is a powerful moment in American history that we're watching unfold right now. Anderson, guilty on all 3 counts, second-degree murder, potentially up to 40 years. We don't know if he'll get that. Third-degree murder, guilty, 25 years, maximum sentence. Second-degree manslaughter, guilty, maximum sentence, 10 years. Don't know if he's going to get all that, but he's going to jail right now for potentially a very long time.
Yeah, and just for our viewers who are watching, on the left-hand side of your screen in the lower corner, what you're seeing is that is the location where George Floyd was murdered. That is where Derek Chauvin killed, murdered George Floyd. On the right-hand side of your screen is outside the courthouse where we were seeing George Floyd's girlfriend. Van Jones, your response to your reaction to this verdict?
Well, you know, one down, many, many more to go. But I think about that young girl who brought out her cell phone and who stood there in horror, not knowing what to do, but just holding that phone steady. She did the right thing. All those community members who came and begged and pleaded and talked, they did the right thing. That EMT person did the right thing. When people called the police on the police, they did the right thing. When the police chief fired this man, he did the right thing. When people marched by the millions, they did the right thing. And part of what I think the message has to be is that we have to get more involved. It started with that young girl. She got involved. And then you had a community stand up, and you had a governor step in and take the case and give it to Keith Ellison to make sure that it was done the right way. This is the beginning of something. This is not the end of anything. This is the beginning of something. Where is Congress? They need to act. Those chokeholds are still legal according to federal government. That needs to change. There's no duty to intervene from the federal government. That needs to change. There's no registry for cops like Chauvin. That needs to change. You know, when you have somebody like, Representative Karen Bass and Tim Scott fighting, we need to get behind them. This should never happen again. One down, many more to go. Sometimes when we fight, we lose, but sometimes when we fight, we won. The people won.
When you saw Derek Chauvin putting his hands behind his back, being handcuffed and let out of the court, what did you think?
Justice. Justice. I've seen so many kids who've done so much less than him walk out of courtrooms in handcuffs with much less evidence. I've seen kids do 20 years, 30 years on snitch evidence. Just one kid testify against another kid and go away to prison. You don't have TV cameras and body cameras and cell phones. So many young people from that community sitting in prison and cops getting away with murder over and over again. That's what justice looks like. When people all we want is the police to obey the law. We're not asking for anything but that, for the police to obey the law. And when they break the law, they should have handcuffs just like anybody else. We don't want them to be below us or beneath us. They should obey the law. That is what justice looks like.
Do you worry some people are going to see this and say, okay, that's good, it's done, it's over?
It took too long. It took too long. It took too much marching. It took too much. It took too many tears. And it was too close. And I don't care who you are, this morning you woke up afraid to hope. You were scared to hope. Even with all the evidence you saw, you were scared to hope this morning. That tells you we need real change. Laura?
You know, these bystanders we heard in the prosecution's closing, they bore witness to what was happening. They felt powerless. They felt guilt. They felt remorse that they could not do more. And I remember that 18-year-old who had the wherewithal and the fortitude to hold America's eyes to what was going on and said, I've spent nights being guilty, apologizing to George Floyd, and then I realized it's not what I should have done, it's what you should have done, talking to the officer who was standing there in that courtroom. And the idea here that here we are, going from a feeling of powerless to having it handed over to the jury, for them to now assign guilt to somebody who was not a part of the noble profession of police officers, that was acting under the color of law because he could. And how dare anyone question my ability to keep my knee on the neck of a man for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. This is a profound moment of justice, but it's also one, as Van talks about, I look ahead to what justice actually means in a definitive and holistic sense. This is but a start. But at least now I can answer my son's question when he says, Mommy, what if that happened to me? I can at least show him what justice looked like today.
I want to go to Sarah Seidner. Sarah, explain where you are, what you're seeing.
Go to the sidewalk. Let's go to the sidewalk.
Sarah Seidner, she's getting back into position. We'll go back to her very shortly. Laura, just in terms of what happens now, sentencing now is several weeks away.
It is. And first what happens, as I said, you'll have what they call the Blakely factors, the idea of those aggravating factors. What that means is the judge will now decide whether the idea of it happening in front of a child, we know as young as 9 years old, the idea of George Floyd being particularly vulnerable in the position, the idea of the power dynamic of an officer to a civilian, the judge will now assess those aggravating factors. You'll also have the notion of what's called the PSI. He said the pre-sentencing report, essentially. And what that is to show the different, they call them crimogenic factors that say what's his remorse, what's his criminal history, if any. I suspect there's none. He's a police officer, or was after all. And the idea is about what would a holistic rehabilitation plan look like. Remember, he's not serving life in prison on any of these charges, so he will one day return to society. What will that look like when he does?
You know, Van, Laura Coates talked about bearing witness, and you talked about it as well, the young woman who held a camera up, and all of us carry those cameras with us. But it really reminds so many people, it reminds us all that we can bear witness in our own lives. Yes. I'm not talking about videotaping things, I'm talking about bearing witness to the struggles of others, bearing witness to the pain, to the injustices that we see.
Yeah, and that was one of the most beautiful things that happened. If you, in January, February 2020, if you'd asked probably the average white person, is police brutality a big deal? Is anti-racism a big deal? Then some would have said yes, some would have said no. Because of that young woman, and because of the video, 20 million white Americans marched, according to some, like millions. I didn't say thousands, millions. There were Black Lives Matter marches in Idaho when they ain't got no black people. That gives you a sense of how humanity's heart was touched. And so that shouldn't just happen in the streets when we're marching. There's so many opportunities, to your point, for us to do better. Listen, the empathy gap that we're seeing throughout our politics can start to close a little bit. Because don't forget, it's important for the young people to understand this. The police chief fired the guy and testified against him. There were people throughout the profession of law enforcement who came forward and did the right thing for once. And guess what? All those people still have jobs, and Chauvin is in jail. So more cops can speak up. More police chiefs can speak up. And more people can do the right thing in these situations.
Chief, I want to go to Don Lemon. Don?
Anderson, thanks. And you know, Van, you're absolutely right, and so is Laura. Laura, we spoke earlier today, and we talked about the people who were standing there on the side of the street and filming this. And yes, they did feel helpless in the moment, but they didn't know their power then, but they certainly know their power now. But I just want to add to, you know, when Van said that there's a lot more to be done. What there needs to be done, police officers around the country are going to have to do things. They are going to have to hold their fellow officers accountable. There are other officers who are involved in this particular incident. And in that moment, they did not, it doesn't seem that they held their fellow officers accountable. And with the Army lieutenant in Virginia, no one held that officer accountable as he was spraying the other officer and treating him in a way that was just demoralizing and disrespectful. So yes, it's incumbent upon the citizens to hold these police officers accountable, but it's going to be incumbent upon the organization and the fellow officers who are there every day with those officers who are not doing the right thing to hold them accountable. I want to get to the streets now. Go ahead.
No, I just want to bring in, you're talking about officers, I just want to bring in Chief Ramsey, Don, to our conversation. Your perspective now when you see what's happened.
Well, first of all, this is the right verdict. And I go back to the closing arguments that the prosecution made the comment that this isn't an anti-police trial, it's a pro-police trial. And when I think about all the men and women that have been killed in the line of duty, serving others, when I think about the men and women out there right now serving honorably, this decision supports them. It doesn't harm them. You know, I've been in policing for more than 50 years. And I've seen a good side of it, but there is a dark side. And that's the side that Derek Chauvin and others like him, that's where they operate, is on that dark side. And light has to be shown there. And there has to be changes. There has to be reform. And I hope that this is a springboard toward really getting there, because we have a short attention span. We tend to deal with what's the issue of the moment and kind of, you know, quiet down a little bit, then it comes back with something else. You can't afford to do that. I think the president's making a mistake by not taking the lead on police reform and saying, well, our Congress can't do much of anything right now. And so, you know, there needs to really be the leadership there. This is the moment. The moment is now. I'm proud that I spent 50 years in policing. I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. But I also can't be blind to the fact that we've got people who have no business wearing a badge and a gun. And even in our training, we don't teach the history of policing. So young cops hit the street and wonder why they go in some neighborhoods and people look at them with suspicion and don't trust them. It's because of the history.
Really? They don't teach the history?
We don't. Some departments do, many don't. We don't teach people how to deal with power and authority. Can you imagine hiring some 20, 21-year-old, give them a badge and a gun in a souped-up car with lights and sirens and then wonder why you have problems? I mean, you know, we have to really look at our profession differently and bring the people in that can handle it in so many different ways. And so this is the moment, and there's a lot that can be done. I'm optimistic. I really am.
Chief, do you think that it was? Chief, do you think that it makes a difference to have the police chief there and other officers testifying against a fellow officer in a trial that is this big, that has so much attention? You said a springboard. I think it's an inflection point, possibly.
Well, the other officers is really more important than the police chief testifying, because the average cop expects the police chief to be able to testify and say, well, he broke the rules, broke the regulations, and so forth. It's the peer pressure. It's the people on the street. It's the when the time comes when some cop that did something wrong, and in that locker room, somebody pulls them aside and say, hey, we don't do that here. We don't do that. That's when you get change. That's culture change. And that's what has to happen. It can happen, not overnight, but it can happen. And it starts with holding people accountable that operate outside of the bounds of justice.
Yeah. And you're right on. I want to get now to Omar Jimenez. You see the scene that's taking place now in Minneapolis, to get out to where the folks there, where it looks like their celebration. This is a Cup Foods where Omar is, and this is where this event unfolded and the reason that we are here today. Omar Jimenez, what are you seeing there?
Yeah, Don, right now we had people literally throwing money in the air, but it has been a feeling and a scene of celebration from the very beginning, from when that verdict was read, guilty on all charges. You heard people cheering. You had people crying in these streets as well. You had people honestly in disbelief over the fact that we even got to this point, that an officer was actually found guilty of a crime that they believed he committed long before the judge ever stepped into that courtroom and read that verdict. I mean, this is happening literal steps from where George Floyd's final moments played out. And right now, everywhere you turn, more people are coming into this crowd, and they are getting more and more excited. And one of those people who was very emotional when the verdict was read, I want you to introduce yourself, but also just tell me why you were so emotional once you learned that the verdict was read.
My feeling was, it's very bittersweet, because his family, much like a good friend of mine, Sandra Bland, Sandy as I knew her, will never see him again, will never touch him, will never hug him. His daughter will grow up without a father. They'll never see him again. He's still 6 feet under. So justice, in my opinion, will never be served. But it is very bittersweet. It's at least something. We're getting somewhere in this country. We're seeing some progress.
And I want to make sure I heard you correctly. You said you were a friend of Sandra Bland's.
Sandra Bland.
Now, that's a reminder when you look at this story that this is about so much more than just George Floyd and George Floyd's case, that this goes beyond his name. It goes to Sandra's. It goes to other names like Tamir Rice and Philando Castile, even just in the Minneapolis area. So bringing that context ahead of this verdict, what were your feelings?
My feelings were and still are, that there is no justice in this country. We have a big race problem. We have a policing problem. We need police reform immediately. This state has a bad problem with police. We're in a militarized zone. Right now, there are trucks everywhere, all over the city, and we're a peaceful city. Everyone has been peacefully protesting, and we're being attacked by law enforcement here.
Well, let me ask you, now the verdict has been read and you got guilty on all charges, where do we go from here? Where do we go?
It's hard to say, because the problem is we have a white supremacy problem in this country, and it was written into the Constitution. And until that Constitution is changed, it's hard to say where we're headed. It's hard to feel like there's going to be justice in this country ever for people of color. We're standing on stolen land right now. So it just feels like, it's hard to say.
And I want to, and I appreciate you and your thoughts, and I want to get into the person holding onto your arm here, who said, "Me next, me next." What do you feel about what happened today? What do you want to say to people out there?
I don't know.
All right. Well, she's wearing a sweatshirt that says "Stop Killing Black People," and when you walk around George Floyd Square here, you see signs and faces of those that have come before the George Floyd case. cases that in many regards were hashtag after hashtag after hashtag in case after case after case. And I was talking to one activist earlier who said that in Minnesota, they know how to organize, they know how to push back, and if you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, eventually they will push back. And they feel that the verdict today in large part was because of the boots on the ground, the pressure that was put on public officials to make sure that this case was prosecuted the right way. And to see all of that followed through has been an incredibly emotional experience for so many. And I want to bring in the comments of one more person really quickly, because in the moment right after the verdict was read, he was incredibly emotional. BJ, I was standing right next to you when the verdict was read, and you completely broke down as you put your fist up in the air. What was going through your mind in that moment?
Basically just that this is something different. This is new. Just because we've been here so many times before, and honestly, the first thing that I really thought about was the Rodney King situation. And I thought it could have been something similar to that, just because we all saw that too. And this feels like we can breathe. This feels like something new. It's hopefully a new day in America.
BJ, I appreciate you. All right. Be safe out here. I want to send it back to you, Wolf. Now, obviously, a scene of celebration here at George Floyd Square, the epicenter of what happened almost a year ago today.
Omar, thank you very much. We're going to get back to you. Just to recap for viewers who may just be tuning in, the former police officer Derek Chauvin guilty on all 3 counts: second-degree murder, third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter. He was handcuffed as he was escorted out of that courtroom. There you see it right there, just to the American people momentarily from the White House reacting to the guilty verdicts. Let's go to Miguel Marquez right now. He's over there at the scene of this murder. Omar, tell us what you're seeing there over there at Cup Foods. I mean, Miguel.
Yes, sir. This is Miguel Marquez, and I am at the Hennepin County Government Center where the verdict came down today. And as it was read out, this crowd erupted in what can only be described as elation after verdict was read. I spoke to one man right in the moment, and he was in tears. This is a guy I'm 6 foot. He was about 6'3", 6'4". He was absolutely in tears, people holding on to each other. You can see right now it's gone from the grounds of the courthouse to the street, and it's essentially a street party in downtown Minneapolis right now. And I don't know if, Jerry, you can hit the building all the way from here, but you can see the Hennepin County Government Center. You can see the National Guard members along that part of it above the steps there, watching out over this crowd. And the crowd is now growing. If we look down the street on the other side of the Government Center here, the crowd is growing exponentially. There's barbecues going. There's people on top of their cars. You even have somebody who's come out to do sign language for those who might need that service. This rig, by the way, the van you're looking at with the speakers, that has been at Brooklyn Center almost every night. This is a rig that we've seen around town. This is something that whenever this particular van with the speakers show up, you know that's sort of where people are gathering. We're also listening to, I believe that's Courtney Ross, who was George Floyd's girlfriend, who responded to us a short time ago about her feelings about this verdict coming down, and she could barely speak. She was completely overwhelmed with emotion. She expected guilty verdicts on all 3, but to hear it is something different. There is a real sense that this means not just something for Minneapolis, not just something for Minnesota, but for the country, for race relations, for policing. That this may not be the biggest step forward, but it is certainly a step forward for people here in Minneapolis. Wolf?
It certainly is, Miguel. Thank you very much. I want to show our viewers here in the United States and around the world the reaction of some of the crowd as they heard about the verdicts. Listen to this.
Second-degree manslaughter, culpable
Guilty on all charges. Wow.
A celebration as they heard the guilty verdicts for the former police officer Derek Chauvin. They heard the Hennepin County Judge Peter Cahill making the announcement in that courtroom. Sarah Seidner has been watching all of this from day one. Sarah, you're there on the scene for us. Give us a sense of what you're seeing right now.
The phone, hey, Morgan, the phone call is not connecting right now.
Unfortunately, Sarah Seidner, we're going to have to reconnect with Sarah Seidner. Don Lemon, we're watching all of this together with you, with Anderson, all of our reporters who are there. So many people are watching.
The brother of George Floyd. He was, when the verdict was read, he called me and there were nothing but tears. He could basically words out. He said that this gave him both relief and release, hearing a guilty verdict on all three counts: second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and manslaughter. He was emotional. He could barely speak, but he wanted people to know that he thanked them for the support that they have been given throughout this entire process. We are trying to connect with him again now as he is, coming out of the court, and we know that we will hear from the family. We know that we will hear from them in not too much time from now. We are expecting to hear from them very, very shortly, but we did hear from him. He called me from court once he was out, and you are seeing the scene of people. Everybody is here. Everybody is out in the streets. There are celebrations. There are a lot of tears. There is, a lot of feeling going on right now, Wolf.
There certainly is, and we're going to watch it all unfold. We expect, once again, momentarily, the President of the United States, President Biden, will be making a statement. He'll be speaking to the American people on the guilty verdicts. We're also expecting to hear from state and other officials in Minnesota. They'll be reacting. But in the meantime, on the streets of Minneapolis, where Sarah is, where Miguel is, where Omar is, there's a celebration going on right now. Don Lemon, it shouldn't be a surprise that so many people, not only in Minneapolis, but around the country and probably around the world, are relieved right now.
Yeah. Wolf, listen, and let's just think back to the coverage that you and I were doing in the afternoon on the Situation Room. The last time we had this long a coverage, live coverage, it was during the gassing of peaceful protesters in Washington, D.C. As we wait for this president to come out and make a statement now, the former president was preparing to do
Hold on a moment, Don. Keith Ellison,
yes, sir.
The Attorney
Yes, sir.
General of Minnesota, together with other prosecutors, is about to speak. I want to hear what he has to say. He was in overall charge of this prosecution. Yeah, I guess they're going to begin. They're going to begin in a few seconds, but they're all gathered there. This is Keith Ellison speaking.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keith Ellison. I'm the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. And since the investigation and prosecution of this case began last May, everyone involved has pursued one goal: justice. We pursued justice wherever it led. When I became the lead prosecutor for the case, I asked for time and patience to review the facts, gather evidence, and prosecute for the murder of George Floyd to the fullest extent the law allowed. I want to thank the community for giving us that time and allowing us to do our work. That long, hard, painstaking work has culminated today. I would not call today's verdict justice, however, because justice implies true restoration. But it is accountability, which is the first step towards justice. And now the cause of justice is in your hands. And when I say your hands, I mean the hands of the people of the United States. George Floyd mattered. He was loved by his family and his friends. His death shocked the conscience of our community, our country, the whole world. He was loved by his family and friends. But that isn't why he mattered. He mattered because he was a human being. And there is no way we can turn away from that reality. The people who stopped and raised their voices on May 25th, 2020, were a bouquet of humanity. A phrase I stole from my friend Jerry Blackwell. A bouquet of humanity. Old, young, men and women, black and white, a man from the neighborhood just walking to get a drink, a child going to buy a snack with her cousin, an off-duty firefighter on her way to a community garden, brave young women, teenagers, who press record on their cell phones. Why did they stop? They didn't know George Floyd. They didn't know he had a beautiful family. They didn't know he had been a great athlete. And they didn't know he was a proud father or that he had people in his life who loved him. They stopped and raised their voices, and they even challenged authority because they saw his humanity. They stopped and they raised their voices because they knew that what they were seeing was wrong. They didn't need to be medical professionals or experts in the use of force. They knew it was wrong, and they were right. These community members, this bouquet of humanity, did it again in this trial. They performed simple yet profound acts of courage. They told the truth, and they told the whole world the truth about what they saw. They were vindicated by the chief of police, by Minneapolis' longest serving police officer, and by many other police officers who stepped up and testified as to what they saw and to what they knew. What happened on that street was wrong. We owe it, and we owe our gratitude to fulfilling we owe them our gratitude for fulfilling their civic duty and for their courage in telling the truth. To countless people in Minnesota and across the United States who joined them in peacefully demanding justice for George Floyd, we say, all of us, thank you. In the coming days, more may seek to express themselves again through petition and demonstration. I urge everyone to honor the legacy of George Floyd by doing so calmly, legally, and peacefully. I urge everyone to continue the journey to transformation and justice. It's in your hands now. I also want to address the Floyd family, if I may. Over the last year, the family of George Floyd had to relive again and again the worst day of their lives when they lost their brother, their father, their friend. I'm profoundly grateful to them for giving us the time we needed to prosecute this case. They have shown the world what grace and class and courage really look like. Although a verdict alone cannot end their pain, I hope it's another step on the long path toward healing for them. There's no replacing your beloved Perry, or Floyd, as his friends called him, but he is the one who sparked a worldwide movement, and that's important. We owe our thanks to the men and women of the jury who gave many hours of their time and attention to carefully listening to the evidence, weighing the facts, rendering a verdict. They are regular people from all walks of life, a lot like that bouquet of humanity on that corner on May 25th and in that courtroom. They answered the call, and they served in a landmark trial. They now deserve to return to their lives. If they ask you to respect their privacy, we ask you to honor that request. I want to acknowledge the remarkable team that helped us prosecute the case. We put everything we had into this prosecution. We presented the best case that we could, and the jury heard us, and we're grateful for that. We had the sole burden of proof in the case, And history shows that winning cases like these can be difficult. I'm proud of every hour, every minute, and every ounce of effort we put in this case. And let me tell you, we spent many hours working on this case, did we not? We, week after week, committee meeting after committee meeting, this team never let up and it never quit. We fought every day and we did it together. The Attorney General's office together with the Hennepin County Attorney's office. Thank you, sir. And we did it together. I'm deeply grateful to everyone who worked on the case. Most of these folks will tell you it's a bad idea to put together a team of all Michael Jordans. Nobody would want to pass the ball. This team, that was their true strength, is sharing the load, passing the ball, understanding that all of us together are smarter than any one of us alone. And that worked. Although the verdict has been rendered, this is not the end. In the coming weeks, the court will determine sentencing, and later this summer, we expect to present another case. We will not be talking about that. This verdict reminds us how hard it is to make enduring change. And I just want to finish by sharing some important historical legacy, if you allow me. In 1968, the Kerner Commission was formed to investigate the causes of uprisings across major American cities. And a man named Dr. Kenneth Clark, a famous African-American psychologist who, along with his equally accomplished psychologist wife, Mamie, contributed to compelling research in the Brown versus Board of Education case. And Dr. Clark testified at the Kerner Commission. And I want to quote you what he said. I read that report, the one in the 1919 riot in Chicago, and it was as if I were reading the report of investigating the committee of the Harlem riot in 1935, the report on investigating the Harlem riot in 1943, and the report of the McCone Commission on the Watts riot. I must say again in candor to you, the members of this commission, it's like a kind of an Alice in Wonderland with the same moving picture reshown over and over again, the same analysis, the same recommendation, and the same inaction. Those are the words of Dr. Clark in 1968. Here we are in 2021. Here we are in 2021, still addressing the same problem. Since Dr. Clark testified, we have seen Rodney King, Abner Louima, Oscar Grant, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, Laquan McDonald, Stephon Clark, Atiana Jefferson, Anton Black, Breonna Taylor, and now Dante Wright and Adam Toledo. This has to end. We need true justice. That's not one case. That is a social transformation that says that nobody's beneath the law and no one is above it. This verdict reminds us that we must make enduring systemic societal change. More than a month ago, months before George Floyd was murdered, the Minnesota Public Safety Commissioner John Harrington and I released the recommendations of our working group on reducing deadly force encounters with law enforcement. What all of us in that working group, including law enforcement, wanted is for everyone to go home safe. Anytime someone doesn't, everyone's lives are changed forever. We need to use this verdict as an inflection point. What if we just prevented the problem instead of having to try these cases? We don't want any more community members dying at the hands of law enforcement and their families' lives ruined. We don't want any more law enforcement members having to face criminal charges and their families' lives ruined. We don't want any more communities torn apart. One way to prevent this is to get into a new relationship where we as a society re-examine the use of force and our old settled assumptions. I'm so proud of Chief Arredondo and the Minneapolis police officers who by their testimony said enough is enough. And another way to prevent it is by acknowledging and lifting up everyone's humanity, helping communities heal, and officers be well. Another way to prevent it is with accountability. Passing laws and instituting policies and training is important, but they must be more than words on paper, and there must be accountability for violating them. With this verdict, we have brought some accountability. Finally, this verdict demands us to never give up the hope that we can make enduring change. Generations of people said slavery would never end. Generations said Jim Crow would never end. Generations said women would never be equal to men. Generations said if you were different in any way, you could never be a full and equal member of our society. Today, we have to end this travesty of recurring, enduring deaths at the hands of law enforcement. Those beliefs are things we have to focus our attention on. And as I now do close, I just want to say to you, the work of our generation is to put unaccountable law enforcement behind us. It's time to transform the relationship between community and the people who are sworn to protect them from one that is mistrustful, suspicious, and in some cases terrifying, into one that is empathetic, compassionate, and affirming. That will benefit everyone, including police officers who deserve to serve in a profession that is honored, in departments where they don't have to worry about colleagues who don't follow the rules. Now that work is in your hands. The work of our generation is to put an end to the vestiges of Jim Crow and the centuries of trauma, and finally put an end to racism. We can end it. It doesn't have to be with us into the future if we decide now to have true liberty and justice for all. The work of our generation is to say goodbye to old practices that don't serve us anymore and to put them all behind us. One conviction, even one like this one can create a powerful new opening to shed old practices and reset relationships. So with that, I just want to say that I do hope that people step forward and understand that nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. You can do something the way like everyday people like Donald Williams and Genevieve Hanson and Christopher Martin and Charles McMillan and all those teenagers and young people stepped up and did something. You can do things like help pass the George Floyd Justice and Accountability Act. It's in your hands. Let's get the work done. And now I'd like to invite my friend and partner in justice, Michael Freeman, Hennepin County Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. First, I want once again to extend my heartfelt sympathies to the families of George Floyd. I hope today's verdict provides some measure of closure for them. Now let me say what a tremendous job Attorney General Keith Ellison did in recruiting and organizing a talented team of prosecutors and supporting staff. Great job. Matt Frank, Jerry Blackwell, Steve Schlescher, and Aaron Eldridge were exceptional. Their use of experts, evidence, and witnesses left the jury no alternative but to find Mr. Chauvin guilty. We and the people of Minnesota should rightly be proud of these four and your entire staff of volunteers and assistant attorney generals and the jobs they did over the last 7 weeks. I'm also proud from the moment that the Hennepin County Attorney's Office charged Derek Chauvin with murder and manslaughter 4 days after George Floyd's murder, our team worked long hours side by side with the Attorney General's team. Managing Attorney Gene Burdorf did legal analysis and writing. Assistant Hennepin County Attorney Joshua Larson did witness prep and strategy development. And Vernona Boswell, manager of our Victim Services Division, has been in direct contact for nearly a year now with the family of George Floyd. Victim and witness advocates Jessica Immerman and Keith Johnson managed all the witnesses, civilian and professional. My two deputies, Lolita Ioa and Andy Lefevre, and I supplied strategic advice and coordination to this talented team 24/7. These guilty verdicts against Mr. Chauvin cannot be the end of the conversation about officer killings of civilians. We need to prevent these killings in the first place. The Minnesota legislature as it moves into the final 3 weeks of the session, must pass a number of bills that will make policing fairer and safer for all, but especially for black men and women and other people of color. I've been lobbying legislators to pass these critical bills. If they fail, then it will be time once again to have a statewide task force to hold hearings and come up with model legislation intending to put an end to these deaths. I am prepared to be part of that fight. Again, Keith, great job.
Thank you, Mike. And now I'd like to ask the trial lawyers to share some thoughts if they have any. But before I do that, I'd like to myself thank a number of people. And I'm just going to start by, why don't we just have our trial lawyers come forward, and then we'll thank our whole team. So, Jerry, Steve, which one of y'all want to do it? Matt, where's Matt? Yeah, go right up.
Thank you, Attorney General Ellison. And when I say thank you to Attorney General Ellison, I want to thank you for calling me and calling me back into public service, which is something that I was able to do as a federal prosecutor, as a state prosecutor, as an assistant county attorney in the United States Army. And when I left private practice, I thought those days were behind me, but I received a call, and it was from Keith Ellison. And he gave me the opportunity to step back into public service, something that is so important to me, something that I cherish. And I would just encourage anyone, if you get a call like that as an attorney, it's a privileged life, it's a noble profession. And if somebody calls you and they ask you for help, don't overthink it. Just do it. As I've found in my career, you get a lot more than you give. I'm honored to have stood with the Floyd family, to stood with the state of Minnesota as we go through this painful process together. And it's been my privilege to practice with this incredible, gifted trial team. And so I stand here today in gratitude. I'm thankful. I want to thank the jury for their service, for doing what was right and decent and correct and speaking the truth and finding the right verdict in this case.
I'm Jerry Blackwell, and my comments are going to be fairly brief. I want to first say thank you to all of these selfless servants that you see standing here and the many more that you do not see, who had the willingness, the courage, the passion, the intentional fortitude to get into good trouble. They stepped into the light and they shined. And for that, I say thank you. I'm grateful for them. I'm grateful for the opportunity that I've had to serve. Now, no verdict can bring George Perry Floyd back to us. But this verdict does give a message to his family that he was somebody, that his life mattered, that all of our lives matter. And that's important. And I also hope that this verdict, for all of the rest of collective, all of us, will help us further along the road toward a better humanity. Thank you all.
Matt Frank.
Well, I can't really follow that too much, but I just want to say that it's been really a privilege to work with this awesome group of dedicated, hardworking people in this endeavor. But it's also been just a total privilege to get to know the Floyd family and to spend time with them and get to know them. Because first and foremost, this is for you, George Floyd, and for your family and friends. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. So let me also thank very publicly.
All right, unfortunately, we just lost that connection, but we've just reconnected.
Balmakun. Thank you, Zuri. And Natasha Robinson. I want to thank you and the next generation, the next generation of justice seekers. Dion Dodd, I want to thank you. Dion, where are you? Thank you very much. And I want to thank you, Vernona Boswell. You are a star. And I also want to thank so many other people But with that, we're going to close our comments right now and just say that we're prepared to continue to pursue justice. Thank you.
Mr. Ellison, what kind of sentence are we going to see? Pardon me? All right, so there you have the Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, and the other prosecutors involved in this case. They did a brilliant job. They got guilty verdicts on all 3 counts: second-degree murder, third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter. We're anticipating that the President of the United States will be speaking shortly over at the White House. We'll, of course, have live coverage when we hear from President Biden. He'll be reacting to these guilty verdicts on all 3 counts. I'm sure he is very, very pleased. We're also standing by to hear from George Floyd's family, members of the family. They are going to be speaking out. We will be standing by for live coverage of what they have to say. And we just got a statement in from the former President Barack Obama. I think we can put it up on the screen if we have it. There it is. This is the former President Barack Obama. Today, a jury did the right thing, but true justice requires much more. Michelle and I send our prayers to the Floyd family, and we stand with all those who are committed to guaranteeing every American the full measure of justice that George and so many others have been denied. That statement from the former President of the United States, Barack Obama. Ben Crump, the lead attorney for the Floyd family, has also put out a statement saying that the Vice President Kamala Harris has called the Floyd family. I think we have a clip. Watch this.
Hello. Hello. Hey, how you doing?
How's Gianna doing?
Feeling better now. Nothing is going to make it all better, but at least God, now there's some justice.
Right.
And I think a Gianna's coming. My daddy's going to change the world. He's going to start to change it now.
That's right.
Yes. Amen.
Start to change it now.
Yes.
So you've been incredible. You're an incredible family. I wish I were there just with my arms around you. I'm standing here with Cedric. We've been talking. We've been watching every second of this. And the Vice President, all of us, and we're all so relieved. Not just one verdict, but all 3. Purely on all 3 counts. And it's really important. I'm anxious to see you guys. I really am. And we're going to get a lot more done. We're going to get police. We're going to do a lot. We're going to stay at it till we get it done.
Hopefully this is the momentum for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act to get passed and have you sign.
That and a lot more. Not just that, but a lot more.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, this is going to be our first shot at dealing with genuine systemic racism. Look, there's 2 people here that feel strongly as I do. The Vice President, she wants to say something.
Okay.
I'm just so thankful to the entire family. Your courage, your commitment, your strength has been a strength for so many people. And this is a day of justice in America. And your family and history is going to show real leaders at this moment where we needed you. And in George's name and memory, we are going to make sure his legacy is intact and that history will look back at this moment and know that it was an inflection moment. You had to sacrifice so much, your family did too. But we really do believe that with your leadership and the president that we have in the White House, that we're going to make something good come out of this tragedy, okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
And you better go get ready, because when we do it, we're going to put you on Air Force One and get you.
We're going to hold you to that, President Biden. Jesus.
Guarantee it.
Thank you, Mr. President.
What I'm concerned about Gianna.
She's okay. I'm going to go tell her in a few.
My wife Jill's with me too.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you.
Thinking about you. Watching every minute of it. So, had a good ending, but it has a positive ending. Things are very true.
Nothing is worth it, but Like I said, I keep thinking of her words. Daddy's going to change the world.
Yeah, change the world. Thank God.
Well, you got a shot to make it change the world.
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah, big change.
You tell her what I said. Remind her she's president. She's
Tell them we're going to personally get up there to see her.
I will.
Let them know we're going to personally get up there to see her.
Yeah. She's coming to see you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. All right.
Thank you, Mr. President. God bless you.
God bless you all.
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, so there you have it. These are live pictures now coming in from Ben Crump and the other representatives of the Floyd family. You see them there. We just heard from the president, the vice president, and the first lady. They called Ben Crump to express their relief and their pleasure at these guilty verdicts. Let's listen in.
Before we say anything, we're going to have a prayer. When we first came to Minneapolis and went to the site, when Ben Crump called, we remembered how Eric Garner said, "I can't breathe," 11 times. His mother came with us to the site. The family came in, and this family has stood together for the last 11 months, watching this video go over and over and over again. This family stood with pain, suffering, and not knowing what the future held, because so many families went and got nothing. They thanked God when they got the indictment, which would not have happened had not the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, took this case. Yeah. And Keith Ellison fought and put together a team that made this possible. And this is the first time in the history of this state that a white police officer has been convicted, less known convicted, of a murder. This is the first time in a long array of fights that we've seen 3 counts, guilty in all 3. We don't find pleasure in this. We don't celebrate a man going to jail. We would have rather George be alive. Amen. But we celebrate that we, because young people, white and black, some castigated, many that are here tonight, marched and kept marching and kept going. Many of them looked down on, but they kept marching and wouldn't let this die. And this is an assurance to them that if we don't give up, that we can win some rounds. But the war and the fight is not over. Just 2 days from now, we're going to have to deal with the funeral of Dante Wright in this same county, the same area. We still have cases to fight, but this gives us the energy to fight on. And we are determined that we're going to fight until we make federal law the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act must be law. We want to thank all that were involved, especially the Attorney General and the Governor and others. We want to thank President Biden, who the first time he came out of his house during the campaign, he flew to Houston and met with the family and Attorney Crump and I. And he sat there, and I will never forget, he said to George's daughter that I heard you say your father is going to change the world. Well, we can now tell George's daughter she was right. Her father has begun the changing of the world for real. But before we do anything, we first want to pray and thank God, because somehow God made a way. He had mercy. We believe in a God that can even get through the cracks in a jury room and bring conscience and bring truth. And that jury, we want to thank them for letting God give them the strength wherever they are tonight. We want them to know we broke down in tears when we heard the verdict. We had to hold each other and hug in tears because too many nights we've cried. Many of us for decades spent nights in jail. But today we can wipe our tears away and fight on for another day. There's sunlight. We're going to keep going till we bring it for the Eric Gardners and the Breonna Taylors, whose boyfriend is here tonight. Kenny Walker. Sean Bell. So many that did not get this night. This night is for them. Let us pray. Let's lock arms and pray like we can, folks. Where? Come on, Brandon. Where's Philonis? Right here. Come on. Yeah, come on. You and Rodney come up front. You know you're hiding now. Brother Chris, get next to the Attorney General there. Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for giving us the strength to stand together. Sometimes we would question each other. Sometimes we say this is just going to be a waste of time. But somehow you touch us in the midnight hours and teach us to hold on. And that if we would be faithful over a few things, you'd give us the victory over many. We thank you because we know it was not any doing of ours, but your loving kindness and your tender mercy that made tonight possible. Bless those that worked, that made this prosecution something they couldn't deny. Bless those policemen that got on the stand and testified against another policeman. Bless the jury that listened to the evidence and didn't listen to those that may criticize them for doing this. Bless the prosecutor, Keith Ellison, and his staff that did their job, even though they didn't know what the outcome would be. Bless Ben Crump in a special way, that worked tirelessly, that jumped on planes and left his family to make sure that justice would rain down. Thank you for all of the civil and human rights leaders that stood up. And we thank you for the nameless grandmas and grandpas that would get on their knees and ask you to give us a victory this time. And Lord, as we give you the thanks and give you the praise, let George know that his name is going down in history. They may have put their knee on his neck, but he will now be a figure that we will take the knees off our necks now, and we give you the praise. Thank you. And God, we give you the glory. These blessings we ask in your name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Let me say that I want to bring on now a man who has symbolized the fight for justice. He didn't seek the role, but he rose to the occasion. America, for many years, didn't have someone to stand for us. The last 4 years, we didn't have an Attorney General's office that would even hear our cry. But we had been raised to believe that God always has a ram in the bush. And God has a way of taking the most humble of people and raising them up. We had an Attorney General in Black America that has represented these cases with the acumen and skill of one that was raised in the South but came to claim this nation in a new direction. I bring you the Attorney General for Black America, Ben Crump.
Thank you, Reverend Al Sharpton, not only for your mentorship, not only for being a great civil rights leader, but for being a moral authority, especially making sure no matter what happened, that we always maintained the moral high ground, knowing that we were on the right side of history as we fought for justice for George Perry Floyd Jr. Say his name.
George Floyd.
I am but a member of a great team of very talented attorneys. And I'm going to acknowledge there, we got the Omegas and the Kappas, Reverend Jackson, and the Alphas in here. I want to acknowledge these great group of lawyers and then the family members. 2 or 3 of the lawyers will address you, and then at that time we will hear from the family members before we take any of your questions. I want to acknowledge a great lawyer from Chicago, Illinois, one of the best I've ever had a chance to work with, Attorney Tony Ramanucci. I want to recognize my partner on the front line in this case, one of the best lawyers at Ben Onum. He hails from Atlanta, Georgia, Attorney Chris Stewart. His law partner, Attorney Justin Miller, Attorney Madeline Simmons, a great Minnesota lawyers, Attorney Jeff Storms, raise your hand, Jeff, Attorney Michelle Godot, and who else we got here? Anybody else? We have Attorney Scott Masterson, who's not present, Attorney Pavani, I said Michelle, we got Michelle, all right, and just a great group of lawyers. And I want to let you know who we have present here with the family here in Minneapolis for this historic day. We have George Floyd's brothers, we have Philonis Floyd, we have Rodney Floyd, we have Brandon Williams, who's George Floyd's nephew, but was more like a son to him. They call him Woo back in the 3rd Ward. Woo, 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 woo. We have Keita Floyd, Philonis' wife. We have, oh, where Terrence at? Terrence, New York, where you at? We got Terrence Floyd, his sisters who are not with us, but we should absolutely acknowledge Bridget Floyd, who hails from North Carolina, his sisters LaTanya and Jaja, who hail from Houston, Texas. We have his cousins, Sharita McGee, Tidra McGee, and Tara Brown. And we have the mother of his daughter, Gianni Floyd. We have Roxy Washington, and we have Gianna. And so I'll make some brief remarks, and then we're going to have Attorney Stewart. Oh. Angela, cousin Paris, and Uncle Selwyn, Vince. All right. Any more Floyd family? I know it's a big crew. AD, the man he came to Minneapolis with, and Adara. So I'll make some brief remarks, and then we're going to have Attorney Stewart and Attorney Ramanucci make some brief remarks, and then we're going to hear from this family, and we're going to try to leave here today knowing that America is a better country. America, let's pause for a moment to proclaim this historical moment, not just for the legacy of George Floyd, but for the legacy of America. The legacy of trying to make America for all Americans, so that George Floyd's victory and America's quest for equal justice under the law will be intertwined. America, let's frame this moment as a moment where we finally are getting close to living up to our Declaration of Independence, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equally, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that amongst them are life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Well, America, that means all of us. That means black people. That means Hispanic people. That means Native people. That means Asian people. That means all of us, America. We frame this moment for all of us, not just for George Floyd. This is a victory for those who champion humanity over inhumanity, those who champion justice over injustice, those who champion morals over immorality. America, let's lean into this moment and let's make sure, Reverend Al, that this moment will be documented for our children yet unborn as they continue on the journey to justice, knowing that the blood of George Floyd will give them a trail to find a way to a better America, a more just America, where Breonna Taylor gets an opportunity to sleep in peace at night without the police busting in her front door, a more just America, where Ahmaud Arbery gets to run free and not be lynched for jogging while black, a more just America, where Jacob Blake and Anthony McLean and Walter Scott and Laquan McDonald and all these other black men, Terrence Crutcher, who was shot in the back while running away like Dante Wright was just a week ago, because for some reason, black men running away from the police is more dangerous than young white men who commit mass murders and walk towards the police with an assault weapon, Reverend Bryant, like Kyle Rittenhouse in Kenosha, Wisconsin. America, let this be the precedent. Let this be the precedent where we live up to the high ideals and the promises when we say liberty and justice for all. Those sun-kissed children are included in all. Those children who overcame slavery, the Middle Passage, the Dred Scott decision, Plessy v. Ferguson, Jim Crow, and his much smarter, wiser son, Jim Crow Jr. Esquire. Let this be the precedence where we overcome systematic racism and oppression, and that we are a better people, and we will leave our children a better world for us all. At this time, we will hear from a great lawyer, because nobody does this alone. It's always a team effort. And we have the lawyers, the preachers, the civil rights leaders, the education leaders, the activists. Let's give a big round of applause for the activists.
Yeah, that's right.
The people who stayed in the streets.
That's right.
The people who came nationally, but more importantly, the people who were here locally, who were standing up for George Floyd on 38th and Chicago Avenue, day in and day out. Silky, the people who wouldn't go home, wouldn't stay quiet. Reverend Jackson, the people who followed your example. Donna Williams. Donna supposed to be here. Donna.
Yeah.
So, we love you, Donna. Without further ado, my brother, Attorney Chris Stewart. And Tony, you coming up next.
Come on.
Smile right here.
We all right.
The first.
Steve Harvey saying full effect.
The first thing that happened when we heard the verdict is that we all teared up and embraced. So don't confuse these tears thinking that they are sorrow. Because those were the tears that happen to African Americans when they're pulled over constantly on the side of the road and know they can't get help. Those are the tears of the victims that we've seen time and time again be shot in the back, choked over loose cigarettes, or killed for no reason, and justice never comes. Those are the tears that someone will weep tomorrow when they are taken advantage of in an interaction with law enforcement. But today the tears are pure joy.
Yes.
Pure joy and pure shock, because days like this don't happen. The whole world should not have to rally to get justice for one man. But that's what happened.
Amen.
This wasn't a city case. This wasn't one family's case. This was the entire world's case. And justice finally came. But it shouldn't have to be so hard to attain this level of justice in cases like this when we can see with our own eyes the only difference is the color of skin. And that's the change that we all want. That's not a change that's outrageous. Yes, law enforcement have a dangerous job. They have to carry a spear and a sword and a shield. But all too often, African Americans only get the spear or the sword. We need more of the shield. Because this is not a case against every officer. My life was saved by 2 law enforcement officers years ago. So I will never throw every cop under the bus. But we will put more cops in jail when you kill someone for no reason, just because they're black. And we can find a unifying purpose between law enforcement and the African American community by changes starting with the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. A beautifully written bill that will help protect the community and solve policing. And the main question is, will we let politics divide us? Because that's what happens. Republican or Democrat, you're going to stick to your side. Unify, as Ben has been saying, as Rev has been saying, and get this bill passed and save people so that you don't have to board up your own cities for situations like this. And if not, we'll see you next time when it's time to vote.
Amen.
You've seen what's happened across this country. And we shouldn't have to be so happy when we finally get one. But we are in celebration for Gianna, for Roxy, who has stood strong this entire time, for the brothers and sisters, for the activists like Tamika and everybody out here, for this entire group. And it wouldn't have happened without every single one of y'all, white or black, people out there praying for this family, getting love and support. And we love all of you all. Let this be a changing point in America for policing in a positive way, and let's unify. Thank you, my brother.
Love you, man. Attorney Tony Romanucci from Chicago, Illinois.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Ben said, my name is Tony Romanucci. I'm smiling here today not for myself, but really for the entire country and for the world that's watching. I know that on behalf of the family and for everyone who's here today, that we stand here before you feeling a tremendous amount of joy and eternal hope. For me, 36 years ago, I was a young public defender in Cook County. Reverend Jackson, I know you know that place very well. And that's where I was introduced to the marginalization of black and brown people. And for now, this is the 36th year I've seen it come through. I really feel that this country has turned a corner. But I'm going to tell you, it was a tough corner to turn, and it couldn't have been done. And I'm going to reach out to you all, the press, for spreading the message, to the strength and wisdom of Ben Crump, to you, Reverend Al Sharpton, Reverend Jackson, the attorneys, Chris, Justin, Madeline, Jeff, Michelle, Lavani, Nicolette, Ian, all the teams in all the cities in this country, the Attorney General and their magnificent prosecution team. They did it, right? They tied up every loose thread for that jury. they let them follow it right through. They showed them how to prosecute and how to convict, and we are so grateful. But make no mistake, we are not done. The George Floyd Policing and Reform Act must pass the Senate.
Yes. Amen.
We now know that today, police can and will be held accountable for needless death. This death never should have happened. George should have been alive somewhere with his daughter Gianna playing on a playground.
Amen. That's right.
From now on, everyone's on notice that police will be held accountable, but we will be held accountable too. This whole country should be held accountable, but police especially. I am so thankful to all of you. I am hopeful for a greater America, for a great vote of confidence. I will tell you that Speaker Pelosi called us not once today, but twice. Our Speaker is a great leader. She is somebody that wants to see this through. We have a great president who wants to see this through. We have one little hiccup in between. Let's get this past the Senate. Let's get justice in America once and for all and forever. One last comment. I met a young lady yesterday. Her name was Lamaya. She said one thing to me that I promised her that I would repeat today. Lamaya is not part of the Floyd family, but she is part of the Wright family. And she said one thing, and I promised her I would say it today. We are all God's children.
Yes.
Thank you, Lamaya.
Thank you, Tony. And I know Speaker Pelosi called. We need to acknowledge when we were over at the courthouse as we were leaving, I got one of those calls and we stopped everything.
No idea.
And it was Chris and Philonis and Roxy, all of us, Justin, as we were walking out, we stopped in mid-sentence because President Joe Biden called to talk about what a moment this was for America and how we have to use this moment to build on. So we want to acknowledge President Biden acknowledging that we are all a better America today. Isn't that what he said?
Kamala.
Okay. Okay. And we got so many good staff people to thank. Jim McGuffin, Michelle, Adner, Roma, all these people who've been working, in the vineyards, supporting our lawyers, Silky, everybody. But briefly, we can't be in Minneapolis and not have a representative, whether Jeff and Michelle want to come up and say a word. Our great Minnesota co-counselor, Jeff Storms. Michelle, get done.
So I just briefly want to say, I love this city. I love this state. And no longer can we be known for these massively infamous failures in civil rights. We owe our children and our community more. From this moment further, from this conviction now, we have to be leaders in this country on civil rights. And everyone standing up here will work tirelessly until that happens. And I challenge everybody else in Minnesota to make that same effort. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Can we, because they're trying to get everybody take a step back. Let's try to make the podium. Just everybody take a step back. We're gonna have the family. We're gonna have this. We're gonna have the family come up. Okay. Okay. We're gonna have the family come and try to greet you all. So you got Arthur. You got to back up too. So the camera's trying to get the podium, yeah. So right now, okay. Right now, we're gonna bring up a man who, when y'all first met him, Tony, y'all remember, all he could do is cry because he was heartbroken. he was heartbroken because remember, so many times it's a case to us. Tamika is a cause, you know, my son is a hashtag, but to them, this was their flesh and blood. Mario, they slept in the bed with George. I mean, the stories that they tell, you know this was a close family. He tells those stories, Reverend Al, how he used to pee on George. But yeah, he has become so dignified and articulate in expressing not just the fight for justice for his family, not just the fight for justice for Black America, but he really has become so articulate in saying we have to fight for all Americans. Mr. Philonis Floyd.
Hey, my nephew, he calling me Baby Al, but Jesse calling me Steve Harvey. But man, I feel relieved today that I finally have the opportunity for hopefully getting some sleep. A lot of days that I prayed and I hoped and I was speaking everything into existence. I said, I have faith that he will be convicted. Whew. It's been a long journey, and it's been less than a year. And the person that comes to my mind is 1955. And to me, he was the first George Floyd. That was Emmett Till.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
I did was on CNN with Deborah Watts, and she just brought him back to life. Wow. People forgot about him.
Yeah.
But he was the first George Floyd. Yes. But today, you have the cameras all around the world to see and show what happened to my brother. It was a motion picture, the world seeing his life being extinguished. And I could do nothing but watch, especially over and over and over again as my brother was murdered. Times, they're getting harder every day. 10 miles away from here, Mr. Wright, Dante Wright.
That's right.
Yeah.
He should still be here. We have to always understand that we have to march. We will have to do this for life. We have to protest because it seems like this is a never-ending cycle.
Yeah.
Reverend Al always told me, we got to keep fighting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put up a fight every day because I'm not just fighting for George anymore. I'm fighting for everybody around this world.
Yeah.
I get calls, I get DMs, people from Brazil, from Ghana, from Germany, everybody, London, Italy, they're all saying the same thing. We won't be able to breathe until you're able to breathe. Yeah. Today, we are able to breathe again. Yeah. Ms. Garner, I told you, we'll get justice. And we're going to fight for you too. We're going to fight for everybody. Thank you all so much for just giving us this time because we're here and we're not going anywhere. And I want to thank all the protesters, all the attorneys who stepped up, all the activists who stepped up, and many who think they're not activists but advocates. Thank you all.
Amen.
Because justice for George means freedom for all.
All right.
Yeah, he did.
Yes, he All right. Terrence Floyd. We will have Terrence Floyd, George's brother from New York City.
The name.
Reverend Floyd.
I'm not gonna preach today, man.
You ain't gonna preach today?
Oh man, so many emotions right now, but I'm very thankful and grateful. Grateful for the people in this world, for the support, the prayers, the love that was shown, whether you sent it by social media or whether you sent it emails or however. We just appreciate the love. I appreciate the team, the Crump Law team. I call him Unc. I call him Unc. We built a bond, a relationship through this whole journey. I appreciate him. He would call me. I'm all the way in New York. He'll call me and check up on me and ask me I'm all right, because I'm the only one up there. Everybody else is down south. So, but he never thought it robbery to check up on me, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for Reverend Sharpton.
Yeah.
Thank you. He been fighting a long time.
Long time.
Long time. Man, Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's a lot of history here.
Yes, it is.
History is here. This is monumental. Reverend Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, they lived to see this.
Wow.
Their fight wasn't in vain.
Wow.
It just didn't happen when they did it, but it happened now.
Amen.
And they're here to see it and be proud of it. It go back to when he did that prayer service. My family is a family that will not back down from prayer.
Yes.
Come on.
Go ahead.
And I believe because of prayer, we got the verdict we wanted.
Amen. Amen.
We got on our knees. Some of us stood up, but we asked the right person. We asked the right one.
Yes.
Come on.
We said, God, we need justice. We need it now. And he answered. Oh man, I'm just grateful. I'm grateful that my grandmother, my mother, my aunts, they just got to see this history made. I'm grateful. My brother's not here. I'm grateful and I'm proud of him.
Amen.
I will salute him at every day of my life. I will salute him because he showed me how to be strong. He showed me how to be respectful. He showed me how to speak my mind. I'm gonna miss him, but now I know he's in history.
Yay.
What a day to be a Floyd, man.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terrence. Now we will hear from George's baby brother, Rodney Floyd.
Oh, man. You know what? I'm going to say this first. I would like to thank all the advocates, the activists. I'd like to thank the people that stayed in these streets marching night and day. People of Portland stayed in the streets, 83 days, I think, I may be wrong, but thankful for everybody that stayed out there making a statement with us, encouraging us on our dark days, dark nights. We had them. And, you know, we got so many messages flooding in from social media sites. Can't read them all. It's so many. But you know what? Thank everyone, each and every one. So many people at grocery stores. We walk in, we hear from the elders. You know, I believe in respecting the elders. Give you guys all the respect, men and women. And I hear them walk up in the grocery store, stop me. I'm mask up, face, a hat and a mask, and they say, "Hey, I recognize the side of your face. Let me talk to you. I know who you are." And we have they'll stop and hold a great conversation telling me what they experienced as a child, what they saw, and what they need for change. And they say, "We are here for you." And this is everywhere I go, my brother go, we all go. And thank you, people, for the love in the streets. I'm thanking everyone because we couldn't have did this, and this is a victory for all of us. There's no color boundary on this. This is everyone who's been held down, pinned down, And you know what, people? And we standing together in unity. And this right here, I'd like to thank our team. Mr. Attorney Ben Crump, his team, Mr. Romanucci, the witnesses, Donna Williams. I would like to thank the jury. I mean, everybody. Thank God. That's all day, God Almighty. Thank you. And you know what, people? We not done yet. And my brother George, he's smiling. His beautiful daughter's here. Gianna, baby, you're so beautiful. You're so smart. Roxy, you have my heart, baby. Thank you for holding Gianna, keeping us strong. I know how hard it is. I know how hard it is. We'd like to thank everyone that helped out in this case. Love to thank this jury from having the hearts and mindsets that we all seen in this video, because we know this video was an open and shut case. Everybody knows this video. And know what, the jury had the same mindset we all had. Guilty as charged. I'd like to thank them. I would like to thank, again, everybody, the press and all. But for George, this fight is not over. We're going to stand here together. We're going to try to get this George Floyd Act passed.
Yes.
The act has to be passed, people.
Yes.
It has to be. We're going to keep pressure on the Senate. Everybody. Thank y'all all for coming. George, I know that he love all y'all. Thank y'all.
All right, Rodney. And next we're going to have a man who, boy, him and George used to text each other all the time. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee always talk about CUNY Homes, Houston, Texas. Back there, Rox, I think y'all call him Woo. We're going to hear from Brandon Williams, was like a son to George. Woo.
It's a very emotional day for me, and I don't really have the words. I'm overwhelmed with joy, but I do want to start by saying thank you. First off, thank you to all you guys advocating, protesting in the middle of a pandemic, putting your lives and safety on the line. We appreciate that, especially to our legal team, Ben, Tony, Justin, Chris, Justin back here. Definitely thank you to Keith Ellison and his team. I think they did an amazing job from start to finish. All of the evidence, all of the witnesses, everything proved exactly what we saw in that video. But yet, we still question the decision of the jury, and I wonder why. Oftentimes, this system fails us as black men and women in America. With all evidence there, everything pointing to a guilty verdict, we somehow still don't get the guilty verdict. Or in some cases, I got my good friend Kenny Walker back here.
Yeah.
We don't even get charges.
Yeah, right.
So today is a pivotal moment for America. It's something this country has needed for a long time now.
Yes.
And hopefully today is the start of that. When I say a pivotal moment, we need change in this broken system. It was built to oppress us. It was built against us. Oftentimes, we see people who are supposed to protect and serve. Supposed to protect and serve. They do the total opposite. On the first day of trial, Rev Sharpton, we had a press conference, and we kneeled for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And when I got up, and it was my turn to speak, I said that every time I come out here, it's hard. Because it's the exact place where they took somebody from me that I love. And I absolutely dislike coming here. But I also said, this time it was easy. We came for one thing and one thing only. That was justice for George Floyd. And today, that's what we got. So this time it wasn't hard at all. It wasn't hard at all. I'm big on faith and prayer.
Yes.
I had a lot of faith, but I was also optimistic.
We need police reform bad.
Yeah.
These guys are able to wear a badge and go out in the field, which means that they're qualified and trained to do their job at a high level. But when you shoot and kill a man that's running away from you that doesn't pose a threat, either you're not qualified and undertrained, or it's a choice and you want to kill black men and women. It's either one or the other. And I think today, Keith Ellison and his team proved that just because you are the law, you're not above the law.
Yeah.
We need each and every officer to be held accountable. And until then, it's still scary to be a black man and woman in America encountering police.
Yeah.
So when I say today is a pivotal moment, it's a chance for America to take a turn in the right direction and right a lot of wrongs so that we don't keep adding to these names. So that little girls and boys like Gianna are not growing up fatherless.
Yes, sir.
So that families don't feel the pain we feel. It's a lot of sleepless nights.
Yes.
No family should go through that. And hopefully our country take a turn in the right direction today. And this day in history proves that it was a turning point. Thank you.
Good job, we're going to hear from just a few more family members, and then we'll try to get to your questions. But I would be remiss because Brandon said I got to acknowledge his man Cliff, who worked for us.
My man Cliff.
And he talked about Kenny Walker. Chris, as we talk about all the brothers, we can never forget that they're killing black women as well. And so we got to remember Breonna Taylor. We got to remember Atiana Jefferson. We got to remember Sandra Bland. And we know Tamika Mallory, May 13th, Pam Turner. In a couple of weeks, we're having a march for black women in Baytown, Texas. Because if you was outraged when you saw the video George Floyd got killed by the police, then you should be equally outraged when you see the video of how they killed Pam Turner, an unarmed black woman laying down on her back that he shot in the face, in the chest, and in the stomach. Justice for George Floyd means freedom for us all, like Philona said, so that's why we're fighting for Pam Turner. With that, we're going to bring up people who come from that Harris County, Texas area, cousins of George Floyd, Sharita McGee and Tara Brown.
Well, first of all, let me just say that my cousins and Wu have pretty much covered everything. There's really not a whole lot left for me to say. I just really want to echo the sentiments of them that when we started this journey almost a year ago, that we were committed to doing a couple of things. One thing is to ensure that justice was served and that we were going to be here and visible and present and actively involved until we saw it through. We are a family who's strong in our faith. We've relied on it in other areas of our life, and this time was no different. And we prayed to God, and we expected our prayers to not come back void, and He delivered for us today. So we are eternally grateful for everyone, from the press to the activists, the attorneys, the prosecution team, everyone. We have so many people that we want to thank that I just really feel like we're probably going to leave somebody out, but I just hope that you will charge it to my head and not my heart, because we sincerely appreciate everything that everybody has done, and we thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. I'm really overwhelmed with emotion, and I just am grateful for this day. It's been a journey, for sure. And this victory for George Floyd today is a victory for many. And when we started this journey, kind of like my sister said, we are committed to making sure we know we'll never get George back. And that's the sad part. But we are fighting, and we're going to continue to fight, because we've all individually and together as a family had that conversation that if we could have been there, with George on that day, there probably would have been more than one death.
Yeah.
But we couldn't be there. So we can't bring him back, but we can save lives. And we want the actual reform that's going to not only give us the change we want, but make sure not another family has to suffer what we've suffered. Thank you all. My sister kind of touched on everything. We have an amazing team here who have helped us along this journey. We are so grateful for everyone who has supported us along the way. We're forever grateful to you, and we love you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. So we're going to hear from two more cousins, and then we're going to hear last from the family, Roxy and Gianna are going to come, and then Reverend Al may have Reverend Jackson and others address you. At this time, we're going to have Angela and Paris come, cousins of George Floyd.
Hello, I'm Angela Harrelson. I'm actually George Floyd's aunt, and this is the cousin here. So anyway, I just want to say that this has been a hard road, not just for me, for the family, but for everybody. And I want to especially thank the Minneapolis community for holding it down at the George Floyd Square. I mean, Janelle Austin, you know, Jeanette Rupert, Maya Washington. These are community leaders that held it down at that place. They kept that place sacred for everyone to go there to express their condolences. And so we appreciate that. And this verdict is a verdict that is well needed and is overdue. And I want to say to the people around the world that is listening, it was a darkness. On May 25th was a very, very dark day. There was a lot of pain and there was a lot of hatred. But I want to say at the same time that I got a chance to witness something. I got a chance to witness the love that I saw around the world that was poured to the family. I don't know if I will ever see that again in my lifetime, but I'm glad that I got a chance to see the love that you have shown me, my family, and everyone, because you've touched us. And I want to say thank you, and I'm so glad about this day. Thank you.
All right, we're going to continue to monitor the family. They're speaking so powerfully, so emotionally. Historic day, as I say, here in the United States of America. The jury, they deliberated for 2 days, 10 hours, second-degree unintentional murder, guilty. Third-degree murder, guilty. Second-degree manslaughter, guilty. We saw the former police officer, Derek Chauvin, then handcuffed by the police and escorted out of that trial. You can see it right there. He is now going to jail. He was out of jail on bail over these past several months, awaiting the trial and the verdict, but now he's going to jail. Don Lemon, I want to get your reaction to the powerful statements we have heard from so many right now, all believing that potentially our country is at a major moment, a pivot potentially in the history of racism in our country.
As I said earlier with Anderson and Chief Ramsey, that I believe it was an inflection point, and actually they repeated that earlier from Steve Schleicher, said the same thing earlier, that we were at an inflection point. You know, Wolf, I stopped taking notes right in the beginning. As everybody was speaking there, I was taking notes, but I stopped for a while just to watch what was happening and just to be able to observe it and absorb it, as not only as a journalist, but as a person of color in this country. And I won't begin to speak for my colleagues, but I know how they feel. That we sit here and sometimes we get, you know, a little bit too dignified, where we think that we can't react to what's happening around us as journalists. And I know that as a mother, that Laura is sitting there and she is thinking about her children, and that they're possibly one day their lives won't be in jeopardy when they get pulled over by police officers, or her husbands as well. And for Van as a black man, when he sees flashing lights behind him, or for Chief Ramsey, who has had to work as a law enforcement officer for so many years and probably suffered injustices as well. And for me, for how emotional it was covering this trial the entire time, and then getting criticized for just the personal aspect of it, not only from the public, but from the highest office in the land. And the last time we spent this much time covering this trial was when peaceful protesters, as I said earlier, was being gassed by the last president. And now we are awaiting word from the current president, who picked up the phone and called the family after this verdict, and the Vice President of the United States. Before I stop taking notes, I will tell you the most important things I thought was said was that by Keith Ellison, who said, this is more than justice, this is accountability. This is accountability. This puts us on the road to accountability, and we have to take that little bit. The second thing I think, and this is not in order of importance, is what Jerry Blackwell said, that this sends a message to the Floyd family that his life mattered. And the third thing was that, and I think it's the most important thing for all of us, is that this helps us further along the road to a better humanity. And let's hope those words stick, Wolf Blitzer.
And we're standing by, Don, to hear from the President of the United States, Joe Biden. He's getting ready to speak from the White House. The Vice President, Kamala Harris, will be speaking as well. A very, very dramatic moment for them, a dramatic moment indeed for the entire country. We're watching this. Derek Chauvin, the former police officer, is now a convicted murderer. He is in jail right now. Our special coverage will continue, of course, throughout the night. Aaron Burnett out front picks it up right now.
This is CNN Breaking News.
And good evening, I'm Aaron Burnett. Out front tonight, our breaking news coverage continues. The family of George Floyd just speaking. His brother with the emotional words, "Today, I can breathe again." And I want to get straight to our Sarah Seidner on the ground. You know that she has been there every minute of this trial. She is joined now by George Floyd's brother, Philonis. Sarah, please take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Aaron. Philonis, you have been here throughout the trial. You have been in the court, which very few people have been in. What was it like for you today? Because you have seen so much in court, all of the bad things that happened to your brother. What was it like hearing from the jury today?
It was a bit of relief. I actually paced back and forth before I even went into the courtroom. I have faith. I believe in God. So I was optimistic, and I kept saying, we will get justice. We will get it. And just sitting in there, just listening to those words, guilty, and guilty, and guilty on all counts, that was a moment that I will never be able to relive. I will always have it inside of me. It's just being able to know that it's justice for African American people, just people of color, period, in this world. This is monumental. This is historic. This is a pivotal moment in history. And all I can think about is Emmett Till. I think about Sandra Bland. I think about Miss Carr with Eric Garner. It's so many people. We have new people being killed. Dante Wright. I think about Jacob Blake. I think about Philando Castile. All of these people, they're all dead. You got people that live near me. Pamela Turner, she's dead. And we all need justice. We're all fighting for one reason, and it's justice for all. And I think today has been an occasion where people can celebrate, but tomorrow it's back to business, because we have to stay steps ahead of everything, and we'll keep pushing, and we'll keep pushing, and like Reverend Al say, we'll keep fighting.
You have been fighting for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, I know. In being in this trial and in watching how it went, can you give me a sense of the absolute most difficult time for you as you watched this process happen and as you watched the trial in person? What was the hardest thing for you?
It was difficult just watching the videos over and over and over again. I watched my brother being executed day after day after day, modern day lynchings. But sitting in that courtroom I knew my Lord and Savior was in there. I knew George was in there. And they were just urging me, because George always said, never give up. He would constantly say, never give up. But that day, when the officer had his knee on his neck, George had no choice but to give up, because he shut all the oxygen out in his body. And my brother, man, he didn't deserve it. But he has changed the world, like his daughter said, Gianna. We'll cement his legacy forever all around the world. Because if you can make federal laws to protect a bird, which is the bald eagle, you can make federal laws to protect people of color. And it's just, man, this is a day of victory. We're victorious, and my family and I, we're going to go and we're going to pray. We're going to pray even more after this, because we owe it to one man, and that's Jesus. And I can say it again, Jesus, good God Almighty. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Philonis, for talking to me and throughout the trial. And I know we had a moment that I felt a little awkward about, because I called you and I said, the verdict has come in.
Mm-hmm.
When I called you and I said the verdict has come in, did you know already?
I didn't know at the time. And I was like, started looking, and social media started showing it. And I was like, wow, it's really a verdict. And it's fast. This was less than 24 hours.
A little more than 10 hours.
Mm-hmm. And it's just a great time. Silk, he's been with me.
I know he's been with you for all of this time, and you've had people around you all of this time. Will you finally get some sleep? Because you have been telling me for the past almost year that you just can't get enough sleep. You can't go to bed. Why is that?
Justice. So many African Americans, we never get justice. But today, I don't want any sleep.
We celebrate.
It's celebrating.
We celebrate.
We feel like we won the championship.
Yeah, it's like we ran the championship.
Mhm.
And we're going to get sleep, but we still got to fight, because they got others that have died. So we got Devontae Wright. We on all those missions right now. So we're going to sleep, but we still got to work. And that's one of the things that we see, everybody running from the work. We don't just want the crown, we carrying the cross.
He said it all.
Philonis, I thank you, and I'm sorry for your loss, because I know this doesn't bring George back, but you have been asking for justice, and you got the verdict you wanted, and the family did. Thank you both. I appreciate it. All right, Philonis Floyd talking to us about what it was like inside of that court. There were very few people that were in the court watching this happen. He was there many, many days. And so he just expressed how this has been for him. Hard, but he always had faith. And that is why he is generally more calm than many other people. It is really interesting to note that as I've talked to him throughout this year, he's always been the calm one. And I've been the nervous one, wondering what is going to happen. Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, it's, and just so you know, Sarah, the President of the United States is going to be addressing the nation, speaking in just a moment here. But, I know you've talked to Philonis so many times, and I know that he had prepared for different outcomes here. But just to see the emotion that he feels, right, was very powerful. And obviously, I can see that it was for you, too, as you were there when the protests happened a year ago, and you have been there all the way through. I mean, what is this day like as a reporter covering this?
It's surreal. It is one of those things where there's an anticipation, where you are on tenterhooks, you are nervous, your insides don't know what to do, because you can't control any of the situations that happen. You are waiting for the verdict along with everybody else. And no matter what the verdict was going to be, it is our job to talk to the people and their reaction to that verdict. And I knew that deep down inside, all of the people that are here, all of the people who have been in George Floyd Square, all of the people who have been fighting for this for a really long time, they were waiting for this verdict, and they were going to react. I mean, they told me, this place is going to blow. If we don't get justice, there will be no peace. And so knowing that in the back of our heads as reporters, and knowing that that's reality, all right, the Vice President is coming forward, so yes. I will throw it back to you,
All
Aaron.
right, Sarah, and of course, let's listen to the President and Vice President. Here is Vice President Harris.
For this service. And I want to thank Mr. Floyd's family for your steadfastness. Today, we feel a sigh of relief. Still, it cannot take away the pain. A measure of justice isn't the same as equal justice. This verdict brings us a step closer, and the fact is, we still have work to do. We still must reform the system. Last summer, together with Senator Cory Booker and Representative Karen Bass, I introduced the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. This bill would hold law enforcement accountable and help build trust between law enforcement and our communities. This bill is part of George Floyd's legacy. The President and I will continue to urge the Senate to pass this legislation, not as a panacea for every problem, but as a start. This work is long overdue. America has a long history of systemic racism. Black Americans, and black men in particular, have been treated throughout the course of our history as less than human. Black men are fathers and brothers and sons and uncles and grandfathers and friends and neighbors. Their lives must be valued in our education system, in our healthcare system, in our housing system, in our economic system, in our criminal justice system, in our nation. Full stop. Because of smartphones, so many Americans have now seen the racial injustice that Black Americans have known for generations. The racial injustice that we have fought for generations, that my parents protested in the 1960s, that millions of us, Americans of every race, protested last summer. Here's the truth about racial injustice. It is not just a Black America problem or a people of color problem. It is a problem for every American. It is keeping us from fulfilling the promise of liberty and justice for all. And it is holding our nation back from realizing our full potential. We are all a part of George Floyd's legacy, and our job now is to honor it and to honor him. Thank you. And now it is my great honor to introduce the President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Today, a jury in Minnesota found former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin guilty on all counts in the murder of George Floyd last May. It was a murder in the full light of day, and it ripped the blinders off for the whole world to see the systemic racism the Vice President just referred to. There was systemic racism that's a stain on our nation's soul. The knee on the neck of justice for Black Americans. Profound fear and trauma. The pain, the exhaustion that Black and brown Americans experience every single day. The murder of George Floyd launched a summer of protest we hadn't seen since the civil rights era in the 60s. Protests that unified people of every race and generation in peace and with purpose to say enough, enough, enough of this senseless killings. Today's verdict is a step forward. I just spoke with the governor of Minnesota, who thanked me for the close work with his team. I also spoke with George Floyd's family again. A remarkable family of extraordinary courage. Nothing
can ever bring their brother, their father back. But this can be a giant step forward in the march toward justice in America. Let's also be clear that such a verdict is also much too rare. For so many people, it seems like it took a unique and extraordinary convergence of factors. A brave young woman with a smartphone camera, a crowd that was traumatized, witnesses, a murder that lasts almost 10 minutes in broad daylight for ultimately the whole world to see. Officers standing up and testifying against a fellow officer instead of just closing ranks, which should be commended. A jury who heard the evidence, carried out their civic duty in the midst of an extraordinary moment, under extraordinary pressure. For so many, it feels like it took all of that for the judicial system to deliver a just basic accountability. We saw how traumatic and exhausting just watching the trial was for so many people. Think about it, those of you who are listening. Think about how traumatic it was for you. You weren't there. You didn't know any of the people. But it was difficult, especially for the witnesses who had to relive that day. It's a trauma. On top of the fear so many people of color live with every day when they go to sleep at night and pray for the safety of themselves and their loved ones. Again, as we saw in this trial from the fellow police officers who testified, most men and women who wear the badge serve their communities honorably. But those few who fail to meet that standard must be held accountable, and they were today. One was. No one should be above the law. And today's verdict sends that message. But it's not enough. We can't stop here. In order to deliver real change and reform, we can and we must do more to reduce the likelihood that tragedies like this will ever happen and occur again. To ensure that black and brown people, or anyone, so they don't fear the interactions with law enforcement, that they don't have to wake up knowing that they can lose their very life in the course of just living their life. They don't have to worry about whether their sons or daughters will come home after a grocery store run, or just walking down the street, or driving their car, or playing in the park, or just sleeping at home. And this takes acknowledging and confronting head-on systemic racism and the racial disparities that exist in policing and in our criminal justice system more broadly. You know, state and local government and law enforcement needs to step up, but so does the federal government. That's why I've appointed the leadership of the Justice Department that I have, that is fully committed to restoring trust between law enforcement and the community they are sworn to serve and protect. I have complete confidence in the Attorney General, General Garland's leadership and commitment. I've also nominated two key Justice Department nominees, Vanita Gupta and Kristen Clark, who are eminently qualified, highly respected lawyers who have spent their entire careers fighting to advance racial equity and justice. Vanita and Kristen have the experience and the skill necessary to advance our administration's priorities to root out unconstitutional policing and reform our criminal justice system. And they deserve to be confirmed. We also need Congress to act. George Floyd was murdered almost a year ago. There's meaningful police reform legislation in his name. You just heard the Vice President speak of it. She helped write it. Legislation to tackle systemic misconduct in police departments, to restore trust between law enforcement and the people they're entrusted to serve and protect. But it shouldn't take a whole year to get this done. In my conversations with the Floyd family, I spoke with them again today, I assure them we're going to continue to fight for the passage of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act so I can sign into law as quickly as possible. There's more to do. Finally, it's the work we do every day to change hearts and minds as well as laws and policies. That's the work we have to do. Only then will full justice and full equality be delivered to all Americans. And that's what I just discussed with the Floyd family. The guilty verdict does not bring back George. But through the family's pain, they're finding purpose. So George's legacy will not be just about his death, but about what we must do in his memory. I also spoke to Gianna, George's young daughter, again. When I met her last year, I've said this before, at George's funeral, I told her how brave I thought she was. And I sort of knelt down to hold her hand. I said, Daddy's looking down on you, he's so proud. She said to me then, I'll never forget it, Daddy changed the world. And I told her this afternoon, Daddy did change the world. Let that be his legacy, a legacy of peace, not violence, of justice. Peaceful expression of that legacy are inevitable and appropriate, but violent protest is not. And there are those who will seek to exploit the raw emotions of the moment, agitators and extremists who have no interest in social justice, who seek to carry out violence, destroy property, fan the flames of hate and division, who will do everything in their power to stop this country's march toward racial justice. We can't let them succeed. This is a time for this country to come together, to unite as Americans. There can never be any safe harbor for hate in America. I've said it many times. The battle for soul of this nation has been a constant push and pull for more than 240 years. A tug of war between the American ideal that we're all created equal and the harsh reality that racism has long torn us apart. At our best, the American ideal wins out. So we can't leave this moment or look away thinking our work is done. We have to look at it, we have to look as we did for those 9 minutes and 29 seconds. We have to listen. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Those are George Floyd's last words. We can't let those words die with him. We have to keep hearing those words. We must not turn away. We can't turn away. We have a chance to begin to change the trajectory in this country. It's my hope and prayer that we live up to the legacy. May God bless you, but may God bless the George Floyd and his family. Thank you for taking the time to be here. This can be a moment of significant change. Thank you.
And you just heard President Biden, Vice President Harris address the nation on the back of the verdict in the case of the death of George Floyd. And obviously an emotional, powerful delivery by both the Vice President and the President. But the President talking about that moment today when he spoke to George Floyd's daughter, Gianna, and said, your father did change the world, part of the emotion that the President shared. And I think it also important to note that he did also point out that this took a unique and extraordinary convergence of factors for this guilty verdict to happen, making the point that there is still so much more to be done. Out front now, Ben Jealous, former president and CEO of the NAACP and president of People for the American Way and Foundation, Stephanie Rawlings-Blake, former defense attorney and mayor of Baltimore, and John Burris, criminal defense and civil rights attorney who also represented Rodney King, and staying with our continuing coverage, of course, Ellie Honig, our legal analyst. Ben, let me just start with you. You know, the very powerful and moving commentary from the vice president and, of course, from President Biden. Derek Chauvin found guilty on all 3 counts. But obviously, a moment, a call to action from the president, but also I felt like a very significant point that he made, that he wanted to point out that he said this took a unique and extraordinary convergence of factors, a jury that was under extraordinary pressure. It took all of that to return justice, you know, clearly making the point that there's a lot more to be done to show that this would be the norm and not the exception.
No, that's absolutely right. And I think for lots of folks around the country, the question is, what do we need to do in our local areas to be safe, in our cities, in our counties? In Minneapolis, the police union has been referred to as a white supremacist group by the AFL-CIO of Minnesota. What does that say about the state of the membership of the department? We know that in most departments, we're told that 10% of the officers or so, according to criminologists, are bad, have a serious problem. 10 or 15% are willing to stand up to them. 70% are silent. What does that really say? Can you be truly good if you don't have the courage to police your fellow police officers? These are what we are all dealing with at the city, county level across this country, and why it's so important that we stay engaged.
Mayor Rawlings-Blake, what's your reaction to what you just heard from the vice president and the president with their emotional words, and of course the call to action on the George Floyd legislation that we heard from President Biden as well? But what's your reaction to their speech tonight? Did it meet the moment?
I definitely think our vice president and met the moment, and it makes me so very grateful for the voters who came out and made sure that we had a compassionate president in the White House. I just can't imagine what this moment would have been with our previous president. And that being said, I don't want us to lose sight of something that the family has said and something that our president said, that we have to meet this moment with more than a verdict. It requires us to be vigilant to make sure that the Justice and Policing Act is passed in Congress. And if it's not, and in the meantime, we need to be at city halls and state houses across this country pushing for police reform. Justice has to be about more than a verdict. It has to be about showing up when the cameras aren't there, when there's no protest, and showing up and testifying, pushing elected officials to do more when it comes to police reform, and forcing the police unions and police to have a response that meets the moment as well. We haven't heard from police officials.
No, and you know, John, you know, to the point that President Biden made, right, that that it took a unique and extraordinary convergence of factors, including a jury under extraordinary pressure, to return this verdict. That it took all of that to return justice, right? That he's raising the point that there's a lot more to be done here. You have felt this in your career, disappointment in the case of Rodney King, in the case of Oscar Grant, who was killed by a police officer who said he mistook his gun for a taser. You know, you said at the beginning of this trial it would be hard to convict, yet it did take them only 10 hours, and they did convict on all 3 charges. So what is your reaction now when you hear this verdict?
Well, I was quite relieved for the verdict. As I listened to the evidence, I was pretty certain that there was plenty enough evidence. But what I was concerned about at the time was the fact that the defense would demonize George, in which they tried to do. I mean, they talked about a lot of his personal life, and that was an effort to demonize him, and that's what happens in a lot of playbooks. So that was my concern about this case. But let me say this. This case is a culmination of a lot of cases that have taken place over the last 30 years since Rodney King. Yep. There's been a lot of video cameras that have taken place, and all of this has been helpful. And for getting to this point, we had a very diverse jury. This is one of the first time that's ever happened. And we had prosecutors and police officers all on the same page. So there's progress in that sense. Whether it carries over to the next case, who knows? But I do think, like others have said, it is opportunity for all of us to work together. You got to have an agenda. You got to meet the people where they are, and you got to continue to put pressure on the public officials and the police chief and all the command staff. And it can happen. It has taken this long for it to occur, but it's going to continue if we continue to work and push for it to occur. So I'm happy about the results.
So, you know, Ellie, as I mentioned, right, jurors came to this verdict after just about 10 hours of deliberations. They did not ask the judge a single question. It would seem that they were very quickly on the same page, you know, but how did What did you read into that? Into the 10 hours, into the not asking a question? What do you think sealed it for the jury?
Yeah, Aaron, this tells me that the jury did their job. The prosecution put on a straightforward, compelling, powerful case. And I think this is an important moment to appreciate the power of the jury in our system. Don Lemon said earlier, we are a symbol of democracy for the world. Indeed, the world was watching. To me, the greatest symbol of our democracy is not the Capitol building. It's not the White House. It's the jury. We don't do expert juries in this country. We don't do professional juries in this country. Our juries are drawn from everyday women and men who get that notice in the mail and they come in and do their job. To me, that is the most fundamental aspect of our democracy, and we saw that in action today.
All right, all of you, please stay with me because I want to talk to you much more. But obviously, the reaction here in Minneapolis and across this country, people are reacting to this verdict. You heard it as people started hearing the news. And of course, as the night here progresses, the initial scene, cheers, hugs, tears, prayers, relief. And of course, we are seeing that build at this hour. Miguel Marquez was there when the news broke. He is out front now where the 3rd Police Precinct was. It was burned down during protests over the summer. And you see, obviously, the peaceful crowd celebrating. Miguel, where you are, I know you've been talking to some of them. Tell me what you're seeing, what's happening.
Yeah, look, everybody we spoke to before that verdict came down thought it would be guilty on all charges. To hear it, though, this city erupted into elation. Let me just show you what it looks like right now in front of the temporary 3rd Precinct in downtown Minneapolis. Just a massive crowd has gathered. They are... It's everybody. It is African American, it is white, it is indigenous people, it is Asians, it is Latinos. Just a massive, massive crowd out here. But there was one moment. There was a young man who was announcing the verdicts on a bullhorn as the verdicts came down. And I want to show you his reaction when he read that 3rd verdict off.
Black lives, they matter here.
Everybody in the city that's been fighting. This is a moment in American history. Let's just keep fighting, you guys. We can make a change.
You're a big guy. This is about to be here.
Right, and this is so hard. This has been so hard for everybody. Everybody's been fighting. Everybody wants this to happen, and it happened. This is a moment for us, and I'm so grateful and thankful. Thank you, God.
That level of shock, that level of disbelief that this actually happened, people here really believing that this is a step forward, that we're not sure where it's all going, but you can see the hope in the crowd here tonight is that this is a step in the right direction, and not just for George Floyd, and not just for those extreme cases, but for justice across the board, and for those everyday transactions between law enforcement and African Americans and people of color everywhere across this country. This case, it sent shivers through every spine in this city, and probably a lot across the country as well.
Yeah,
Aaron?
I mean, interesting, amazing, as you say, they all expected it, they believed it would happen, but yet we're still shocked and so visibly and emotionally moved when they actually heard it. We're going to go back to Miguel, but, you know, I want to just go back into that room, right? The people who were actually in the room. As this was read by the judge, the jury is there. We have new details at what happened off camera and inside that courtroom. And again, just to make sure you all understand, the 12 men and women on that jury took just 10 hours to reach their verdict. They found former Officer Derek Chauvin guilty of second-degree unintentional murder. That has a prison sentence of quite a range, 12.5 to 40 years. Also guilty of third-degree murder. The prison sentence there also 12.5 to up to 25 years. And guilty of second-degree manslaughter. The sentence there between 4 and 10 years or $20,000. Josh Campbell's out front in Minneapolis tonight. And Josh, you know, you were actually there. You were inside the courtroom when this happened. Jury returns. Everyone's silent. This is a moment that the whole world is watching, and you were there. So tell me about it, and tell me of what happened off camera. That, you know, we only saw you know, the Derek Chauvin's response. You saw so much more. Tell me.
Yeah, Aaron, I mean, I'll say at the outset that I don't consider myself someone hyperbolic or dramatic. I cannot remember being in a room ever where the tension was so palpable. And of course, as a reporter, my job was to get reflections and to focus on everyone else. Nearly everyone in that room was exhibiting some kind of physical sign that they knew how serious this moment was. At the defense table, Chauvin sat there with his attorney Nelson, no notes on their desk, no binders, everything empty, sitting there very, very still. At one point, Chauvin was actually looking down and just dazed off. His attorney started talking to him, and it was almost like there wasn't anyone sitting next to him. He was just staring and then snapped out of it, finally realizing his attorney was talking to him. I was just wondering what was going through his mind at that moment. This was before that verdict was read. For their part, the jury completely still. No emotion, no physical response from them after that was read. I don't know if that was something they discussed in advance, because as we've covered this trial, each of them have been very idiosyncratic in their own way, but they were all still, all calm, just watching the verdict. There was emotion and there was agitation and anxiety, I would say, at the prosecution table, especially on the part of Steve Slisher, who was, of course, the defense attorney we heard on the morning of closing arguments. He was perhaps the most nervous person I saw in that courtroom, looking around, darting around, fidgeting, no doubt that anxiety, waiting to hear what was to take place. But I have to tell you that perhaps the most moving moment that I experienced inside watching came from seeing Philonise Floyd, who was in the seat for the Floyd family. He spent nearly the entire hearing in prayer. And I would look back and he would be in prayer, except for when he was staring at Derek Chauvin across the room. He sat there in prayer. And, you know, just to tell you, when that moment came, when the verdict was read on all three of those counts, he sat with his hands covering his face in a steepled fashion in prayer. And as each was read, guilty, 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 his hands We have a phone call. It's President Biden. And I stood there listening to that phone call take place between the Floyd family and the president, as well as the vice president, with President Biden consoling the family, telling them how proud he was of that family for all that they've been doing in pursuit of justice. And he said that something which you go back to George Floyd's daughter, Gianna. The president brought her name up and said, "I can't stop thinking about that line. Yeah. Daddy's going to change the world." And he said that it is. And just the last thing I want to say, which this is just kind of brings this all home. Yes. That was all the prosecution. That was the family. The other major moment was seeing an officer walk up to Derek Chauvin afterwards when he was remanded into custody and saying, "Mr. Chauvin, please place your hands behind your back." The left cuff went on, the right cuff went on. He was taken away. Someone who used to work in this criminal justice system found guilty.
What happened in the room? Everybody's reaction to that moment, and Chauvin himself's reaction. Obviously, when the cameras were on him, we saw as viewers no emotion, right? He was stoic throughout it. But tell me, what did you see anything different, and what did you see from others in the room at that moment?
Yeah, the only reaction that I saw, I think everyone was either in some state of shock or, finally we had this resolution on what that verdict would be. But two people who were really showing emotion, Philonise Floyd, he went from prayer to crying. Afterwards, the prosecution, once the judge had departed the room, they were giving each other hugs. They were giving Philonise hugs. And back to Steve Slisher, that prosecutor, he could not keep it together. His eyes were turning red. He was standing right next to me, wiping away tears from his eyes as he sat there, or stood there rather, hugging Philonise Floyd. So just incredible emotion in that moment. And then it was over just as quickly as that, as the criminal justice system works. Sometimes the wheels turn slowly. Here we got a verdict today, and that trial ended. Of course, we now know what the resolution was in this trial.
So, Aaron? Josh, thank you so much for taking us into that room, because it does add so much, because we only had the camera views that we had. If any of you, of course, many of you, I'm sure, who are watching now, were watching. But even if you just saw moments like the ones we just played with the handcuffing of Derek Chauvin, everyone back with me. Ellie, let me just give you a chance to react to Josh's reporting, because I know you've been in so many of these courtrooms, that his perspective, as a reporter and also, of course, formerly law enforcement himself, never been in a room with so much palpable tension as as in that room.
Yeah, Josh paints such a vivid picture, and it's a reminder of just how solemn that moment is when a jury renders its verdict. An individual's liberty is at stake. The sanctity of our system is at stake, and most importantly, the victim's family is there. That's all the victim's family has. I've done murder cases. Of course, you can never undo what's been done. You can never bring their loved one back. This is all they have, the hope of getting justice and accountability from a trial jury of everyday citizens. And I think that's what Josh saw today in that courtroom.
You know, Ben, one thing, you know, that this all happened, of course. The original report was that, you know, someone had died because of a medical condition while in police custody, right? And the reason that we know that this was different was because of bystander video, right? A 17-year-old girl, Darnella Frazier, she filmed the 9 minutes and 29 seconds that Chauvin pinned Floyd to the ground. She posted to social media. So that's how we know about this, right? And yet, you know, Vice President Harris, she brings it up tonight. This is all because of smartphones. I raise the point, though, that we've had smartphones for quite some time, and we've had a lot of videos for quite some time. But this is the only time that this has ended this way, and that, of course, is significant.
No, it truly is. And you think about all of the movements that had to be built in order for this moment to happen. All the activists in the street, Keith Ellison running for office, becoming the first black chief prosecutor of the state. And yet it shouldn't take all of that. And we won't be done in our work. We have to see this as a beginning, not an end, until George Floyd's daughter can, with confidence, know that she will be safe throughout her entire life in a way that her father was not able to be, because the very people who had sworn to protect his life took it from him. And so that's why it's so important that we stay in the streets, that we keep organizing, and that we make sure that we actually don't just try what we've tried before that has failed, but actually have the courage to try new things.
Mayor Rawlings Blake, you know, also anyone watching here, you can see on my screen outside the 3rd Precinct in Minneapolis, a peaceful crowd gathered, right? They're celebrating, they're happy. We're seeing that across the country. And that's important and that's significant. It also stood out to me that President Biden, even in the face of knowing that the crowds on the streets are happy with this, took the point to say that violence is not welcome, that there could be agitators and extremists who would destroy property and loot, and that was not welcome. I thought it was significant that he made a point of saying that, even in light of the fact that obviously what we're seeing tonight and thus far is, of course, peaceful crowds celebrating an incredible moment.
I think it's important for him to say that because the voice of the community that is impacted by the looting and the violent protests are often unheard. Because we understand the frustration of our community dealing with injustice, I think too many of us turn a blind eye to the impact it has when businesses are closed because they've been looted, because they've been destroyed, and many of them don't come back. And that's something that we cannot forget, because that is a community that has been doubly impacted by the violence in their community.
John, let me just ask you about the sentencing here. And I had briefly laid out some of the ranges, right? That in Minnesota sentencing guidelines, the presumptive sentence for both 2nd-degree and 3rd-degree murder is 12.5 years. You could get, 10 years. You could get 4 years for manslaughter. This can all be served concurrently. But there's something called, you can get a tougher sentence if there's aggravating factors. Derek Chauvin waived the right for the jury to decide if there were aggravating factors, such as George Floyd, for example, being especially vulnerable. Put that on the judge, who now has to decide that, and therefore, if he says there are aggravating factors, could provide a sentencing, in the case, obviously, of the most severe charge here, of up to 40 years. So when you look at the sentencing guidelines, what do you think happens here? This is now all on the judge, right? Because the range here of 12.5 to 40 years and just the most egregious charge is a huge range, and it's now all on the judge.
The judge actually, how he felt about this case is hard to say, because I thought he did a pretty decent job in being unbiased and making fair rulings. But he himself, I'm certain, will be motivated by the officer's conduct. you know, the way he dealt with George Floyd in terms of his disinterested in trying to be providing care, his failure to turn him over, the judge could find these are aggravating factors and could, in fact, increase the sentence. I suspect that he will. Now, all these sentences can run concurrently, which means the most you're going to get is whatever that would be. That may be 12, except the aggravation. I could easily see in that being 5 to 10 years more and getting this up in the 20-year range. That is an option that a judge has here, and the aggravation is pretty strong there. The other aggravating factor might be the fact that he has, you know, what his record is. We don't know what his record is as a police officer. We understand that he had a lot of complaints. It seems to me those could be aggravating factors as well, even though they weren't brought into the court. But there are conditions, like they do in other cases. You look to see what a person's background is. Who was that person? What were they doing? You can't necessarily use them as evidence factually, but you can, in fact, incorporate them into your thinking if you want to aggravate the case. So I hope that he does, because I think the community would not be satisfied if he got a modest sentence, even if it's just 12 years, in light of the fact that the murder itself was so outrageous. And so I would think that the general population and the judge himself would want to increase it. Remember this, the FBI, when they tried to get a sentence for 10 years, the FBI, through then Attorney General, said, no, that wasn't enough. So 10 years wasn't enough then. 12 years is not going to be enough now. So I can see where it should be increased significantly as a result of the aggravating factors.
All right, John, thank you. And